Welcome to the Awful Evil Podcast, your twice weekly dose of sanity in an insane world. Another bonus episode. We're doing it again. I don't know why this needs to have a committee hearing at all. There's this transgender lab rats and poison puppies thing. We're going to hear a lot of really dumb arguments and a lot of things that really we shouldn't be talking about in the halls of Congress. But I mean, this is how our government works, apparently. They usually take a little bit of time. We're going to get into a little bit of other things that I have on deck to try to fill time till they can pop into the hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just go ahead and get started before they do. Roll it.
Hey kid, don't ever let them get inside your head. They'll tell you what to do in life instead of everything you know that you could get. Don't let them guide your life towards regret. I'll fight for what I love with every breath. My past is filled with things I won't forget. I use them all to push me to my best. So treat the worst of times just like a test. If only I could go back in time, I'd tell myself that everything will end up alright. Just push yourself, test yourself, figure out what you like, and find your limits, don't be rigid, always work towards a prime. Surround yourself with open minds, people can change your life. A few friends with intent can help you feel alive. Find a passion, take some action, and with a little time, just be patient, make a statement, try to enjoy your life. They'll try to kick you while you're down. They wanna rise up while you drown. They wanna fill your head with doubt. They're silently scared that you'll figure it out. I'll make it look like I'm losing, won't bother hiding my bruises. And when they finally think you're wounded, then it's your chance to be ruthless. I'll make it look like I'm losing, won't bother hiding my bruises. And when they finally think you're wounded, then it's your chance to be ruthless.
I can't stand this potato of a human being. And if you don't know who my little tater tot is over here, once again, you'd be correct. And everything I know about her is against my will. I can't get away from her. She's an online panhandler. She's unemployment's final boss. She sits on the live for like 12 hours a day and then cries when she doesn't get money. And she's making thousands of dollars. I am astounded, dumbfounded, downright flabbergasted that people give them money. Like, who are you people giving them money? She'll hop on saying, like, this is her job and she needs to take care of her kids, which she doesn't do, by the way. And in the same breath be like, I've only made $1,000 so far today. Are you fucked? I have never seen something so heavy not be able to be down to earth. Holy fuck. No, seriously, how does one achieve this build? Bloated pre-corpse, I swear to Christ. And I don't normally do stuff like this, but her name's Ash Trevino, and I needed to hop on here just to remind kids that, like, please, for the love of God, keep having aspirations. She's like 50. Well, I don't know. She could be a real rough 28. Who the hell knows? But she's making music like this.
You want to know how it smells? Ask Santos. You know it smells well.
She made that song because I think somebody she was fucking basically said that she smelled like 3-day-old Kmart sushi. And if you're wondering who Santos is, he's like some 19-year-old shitty father or something. I don't know. I haven't gotten that deep into it. Anywho, she's like the living embodiment of a hot Cheeto empanada. All right, I'm out of here. Get fucked, cunts. Merchants about. Okay, bye.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, please, for the love of God, stop propping up stupid people. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have a little bit of fun with it. Either this is going to be irritating and just downright blood boiling, or this is going to be one of the dumbest things you'll ever hear in your life. There's going to be no in between on this one. Well, I take that back. There will be an in between. This is going to be like, transgender lab rats. Why are we here in the hearing? It could be that. I've seen a few of them as well, but like, it just doesn't make sense why we need to have a hearing on taxpayer funded cruelty, animal cruelty for transgender. That really kills me. I know they're being hyperbolic. There's probably some real shit in this. But yeah, I wonder if they're going to bring up the Fauci thing where he put people's faces in cages and the sand fleas, whatever the fuck they were. I wonder if they'll bring that up because that was taxpayer funded. But yeah, we'll get into a little bit of that. And just to let you know, I am watching. It is there. It is unmuted. And it is turned all the way up, so if something happens, we'll hear about it. What's going on, everybody? We got Just D in the house this morning. Well, this afternoon, really. Shane's with us. I see Polar Bear is over there on the Rumble side as well. We got Muffin in the house. This is going to be incredibly time wasting. Either that or I don't. I don't even know what to call this one. This one's just going to be like, I saw this pop up on the timeline of everything. I'm just like, but why? Why is this a thing? Oh, are they already starting? Hold on. I hear things in the background of this. Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. The Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology,
Hold up. If this is Mace, we're going to have fun with this one.
and Government Innovation will now come to order. And welcome. A good afternoon. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good afternoon.
What up,
Late
RP?
last year, the White Coat Waste Project exposed more than $10 million in taxpayer funds that were spent creating transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. These DEI grants funded painful and deadly transgender experiments that forced lab animals to undergo invasive surgeries and hormone therapies at universities across the country. For example, the Biden-Harris administration spent $2.5 million taxpayer dollars, $2.5 million taxpayer dollars to study the fertility of transgender mice.
I'm
Let
sorry,
that
what?
sink in. We spent over $2 million studying the fertility of transgender mice. $1.1 million was spent to find out if female rats receiving testosterone therapies to mimic transgender men were more likely to overdose on a party drug, commonly used in the LGBTQ community to induce drug-fueled what's called, quote, chemsex. I asked my staff what was chemsex and the chemical, and I guess it's something called GHB, which is a date rape drug, and also a drug that's used recreationally. So we spent over $1 million.
The fact that your children know that should be concerning,
rats
ma'am.
receiving testosterone therapy were more likely to overdose on a date rape drug. Like, that's what your taxpayer dollars were being spent on. Federal funds were also used to forcibly transition male monkeys to see if hormone therapy made them more susceptible to HIV. I didn't know this until recently, but monkeys cannot be infected with HIV. Yet this federally funded experiment forced them to take hormone-altering drugs to study a virus they cannot have. The Biden-Harris administration was so eager to propagate their radical gender ideology across all facets of American society that they were surgically mutating animal genitals. Like, taxpayer money went to
She's
that.
already got
So
my
our
attention
question is,
now.
were they castrating mice, castrating monkeys? Were they getting double mastectomies? The language that they used in many of these experiments were, quote, gender affirming care, which I learned about 3 years ago what that meant. I thought that was maybe just some hormones or something something like that. But apparently gender affirming care is actually surgical mutilation of genitals. And apparently it's not just humans, they're doing it too. We were doing it with taxpayer dollars to animals. It's well known that because of the differences between animal and human biology, animal testing frequently does not produce results relevant for humans. In fact, 90% of novel drugs that are successful in animal tests fail in human clinical trials. Today's scientific questions are so complex that we have well surpassed a time where it is useful or appropriate to rely on inhumane animal experiments to answer them. Recently developed technological tools can more accurately model human biology and identify solutions that are more useful for human patients. But it is often the federal bureaucracy that prevents these new technologies from being used. Instead of adequately investing in these innovative alternatives, the federal government has continued to funnel taxpayer dollars towards cruel animal experiments. Today, most of the 27 NIH institutes and centers conduct or support animal testing, as does the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense, and countless other agencies. We have some beagle puppies here with us today. Beagle puppies have
she's doing it.
gone through some of the worst medical experiments. I mean,
He's
drugging them
bringing
with
it the fuck
cocaine,
up.
having insects eat at them and their bodies so much until they die, drugging them until they die. These are God's creatures and they're beautiful. And you can see them sitting in the front row today. So we thank the folks who are here and brought these
Say it
beautiful
again.
beagle puppies here today. In fact, the US government spends in excess of $20 billion a year conducting experiments on animals. The White Coat Waste Project found in 2021 that the NIH, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, a component of NIH at the time, ran by Dr. Fauci, spent $1.68 million force feeding toxic drugs to beagle puppies between 6 and 8 months old before dissecting and killing them. The conversation we're having today is important. In 2022, due to public criticism lobbied against Fauci's NIAID by me and other members of Congress, another $1.8 million experiment to abuse beagle puppies in various drug tests was canceled. So I want to thank the work of White Coat Waste and everyone in the room today,
I don't know. I think
others
it's
who've
just
been on the
people in
forefront of this
the
fight
crowd
to end this sick and
for the
cruel and
Fauci thing.
barbaric testing of animals today. Thanks to one of our witnesses, Justin Goodman of White Coat Waste. We have in the audience, I already know the beagles are here. The beagles are a reminder of the real cost of animal experimentation. So I'm looking forward to this conversation this afternoon regarding wasteful government spending on animal cruelty. And I also want to say, before I yield over to the ranking member for her opening statement, that this is a nonpartisan issue. Ironically, in oversight, while we might fight a lot in public, we are actually very nonpartisan here. And some of the most nonpartisan work in Congress comes right through this committee. So I want to thank the ranking member, look forward to working with you, and I yield to you for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, and good afternoon to our three
Oh,
witnesses.
goddamn.
Thanks for being here. Chairwoman Mace, I
Somehow this is
appreciated,
going to be
working
racist.
with you last week to introduce a bipartisan bill to strengthen federal contractor cybersecurity. I was glad our teams were able to connect early into this new Congress. And on a personal note, my team found your staff to be very responsive and helpful.
Likewise.
As the ranking member of this subcommittee, I look forward to continuing to work with you to modernize and secure federal IT systems from
I mean,
potential
you're not wrong, though.
cyber attacks. Bipartisan solutions like this are critical to protecting our federal system from cyber threats.
What
I
up,
look
Louis?
forward to finding more common ground and delivering results for the American people. I'm looking forward to having a productive discussion today about the scientific innovations and the
Why
need
is
for
it they're
additional
only
oversight
masking the
of
white people?
alternatives to animal testing. Each year,
All right, I'll stop.
millions of
I'll
animals,
stop.
including dogs, cats, and monkeys, are used worldwide for research. And I think it's safe to assume that everyone here in this room would like to see that number reduced. We are living in a moment where there have been extraordinary advancements in medical research, utilizing groundbreaking technology like artificial intelligence, 3D bioprinting, and robotics that allows us to reduce our reliance on animal testing. I'm especially proud that much of this innovation is happening in my district, Ohio's 11th, home to world-class research universities and medical institutions. Not
What up, Rhoda?
only does this offer the chance to save animals from suffering, these methods can actually lead to better and more accurate results. From a scientific perspective, one of the main issues with animal testing is that these trials often fail to produce results relevant to humans. In fact, 90% of new drugs that are shown to work in animal models fail in human trials. Dr. Locke, one of the witnesses here today, is going to explain this phenomenon. And he said it, and I'll quote, that animal biology is just too different from human biology. Because of this, a great deal of funding and time is wasted on experiments that ultimately do not
Because she's going to
translate
have
to
fun
human
twisting
trials.
this to be
By
racist.
modernizing our research methods to avoid the use of animal subjects, we can also save precious taxpayer dollars. Thankfully, there are viable alternatives that are more ethical, accurate, and efficient ways to study human biology and disease. We now have the technology to
Every
effectively
time she
replicate
speaks.
organs in labs, allowing us to better see how the human body will respond to drugs and treatments. We have machine learning systems that can analyze large sets of health data to develop predictable models of patient response. We have the capabilities of
That girl in the
3D printing
background's like, why the
tissue
fuck
and
am I here?
muscle to test cosmetics, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals in a highly realistic way. Just these few examples highlight the amazing work that has already been done and the important need for continued investment in the medical field. At the time, we must institute strong oversight of the animal testing that is still occurring to ensure that our federal dollars are being used ethically and transparently and that harm to animals is minimized. I believe it is our moral responsibility to advocate for animals
She
who
didn't
cannot
learn from
speak for
yesterday. That's the
themselves.
same woman.
Last Congress, I was proud to
No, no, the
co-sponsor
other
the
one was
Humane Cosmetic Act,
black hair,
which
wasn't she?
addresses the use of animal testing in the cosmetic industry.
Something like
This
that. But yeah,
bill
there was
has
another one.
massive bipartisan support, demonstrating the progress we can make in this area. I look forward to hearing more
That
from
wasn't
our
Ms.
witnesses
Brown's
on
aide
these
last time.
important issues, and
I think
I
that
look
was
forward
Connolly.
to future hearings in the months to come on important topics of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and government innovation. Thank you.
Great job. I'm pleased to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. Our first witness is Mr. Justin Goodman, Senior Vice President, Advocacy and Public Policy at the White Coat Waste Project. It's also Mr. Goodman's birthday today, and so I'd like to wish you a happy birthday and thank you for being here today. Our second witness is Dr. Paul Locke, Professor of the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our third witness is Ms. Elizabeth Baker, Director of Research Policy at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Welcome, everyone. We're pleased to have you this afternoon. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses, if you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses all answered
Technically,
in the
you're
affirmative.
correct.
We appreciate you for being here today and look forward to your testimony. You may be seated.
That just
Let me
sounds
remind
wrong,
the
though.
witnesses that we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on when you speak and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. And when the red light comes on, your 5 minutes is up. And we would ask that you please wrap it up. I would like to recognize Mr. Goodman to please begin your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairwoman Mace, Ranking Member Brown, and distinguished members of the committee,
That
thank you
was
for the
awkward.
opportunity to testify today. As the chairwoman mentioned, it's my birthday, and this is the greatest gift I could possibly ask for. My name is Justin Goodman, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy at the nonprofit, nonpartisan government watchdog White Coat Waste Project. White Coat Waste has one mission: to stop taxpayers from being forced to pay for cruel, wasteful, inefficient, and dangerous animal experiments in labs around the world. Lab survivors Nellie, Beasley, and Oliver, sitting behind me, are three of the many reasons why. Many people don't realize that the US government is not only the single largest funder of animal testing in the country, but in the world. Uncle Sam outspends the private sector on animal testing 2-to-1. This isn't something to be proud of. Over 20 years ago, the NIH budget doubled and animal testing skyrocketed, but overall, people aren't healthier or living longer. It is estimated that over $20 billion a year of taxpayers' money is still wasted annually on ineffective and inhumane tests on tens of millions of puppies, kittens, and other animals. Am I being flippant when I use the word waste? Absolutely not. The NIH itself has said, quote, "Animal models fail to mimic disease or predict how drugs will work in humans, resulting in much wasted time and money," end quote. Yet agencies continue to dump billions of tax dollars into animal tests despite the horrible return on investment. Experiments we've uncovered range from the savage to the stupid: injecting puppies with cocaine, staging hamster fight clubs, putting dead turtles on treadmills.
Right.
One of the reasons this problem has gotten so out of control is a stunning lack of innovation, transparency, and accountability. Agencies do not report or even track, in some cases,
Hamster
how
fight
much
clubs?
money is being spent, how many animals are used, what's being done to them, where, and what
Is there a
taxpayers are
poly
getting
market
out
for
of it.
that?
We file hundreds of FOIA requests every year to glean just basic information. When we can find out how tax dollars are being spent, it becomes apparent why federal agencies fight against disclosing details. For example, Senator Rand Paul's December 2024 Festivus report highlighted cruel taxpayer-funded cat experiments exposed by my organization. In one $10 million DARPA grant, cats have marbles shoved up their rectums and are electroshocked to make them defecate in constipation experiments. We've also recently identified over $240 million in NIH grants for transgender animal experiments, including $26 million in active funding.
What
Some of
the
these
fuck?
tests, as the chairwoman mentioned, examine the effects of party drugs on animals injected with testosterone and how hormones used for human gender transitions impact the size and shape of animals' genitals. How does this translate to helping the average American? Shockingly, 95% of this funding came from Dr. Fauci's NIAID. Speaking of Dr. Fauci, our group is perhaps best known for exposing his and USAID's funding for dangerous gain-of-function animal experiments at the Wuhan.
I'm sorry. Imagine you go to school for 12, 13, 14 years, right? You're studying biology, you're looking at genetics, virology, that kind of thing, and then all of a sudden you're put into a fucking job where you look at rat testicles all day and, and you measure the size of them.
Wuhan lab. We also uncovered his support for cruel beagle tests around the world. Taxpayer-funded animal tests may have caused COVID. Unfortunately, the government hasn't learned its lesson from what happened in Wuhan. Today, there are still 26 animal labs in China, including labs controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and tied to the military, approved to receive NIH funding. This isn't just
Why?
a misuse of taxpayer dollars, but presents a national security threat. White Coat Waste recently obtained a contract funded by the NIH and DoD that's paying for 300 beagles a week to be restrained and injected with or force-fed experimental drugs in a Chinese lab. The reason they chose beagles like Nellie, Oliver, and
I'm
Beasley,
sorry.
the
This is
contract states, and I
this is
quote,
hitting me today.
beagle dogs are docile, cute, and easy to domesticate, so it has been the best choice, end quote. Not because it's effective, but because it's easy. This issue extends beyond China. 344 animal labs in 52 foreign countries are approved currently to receive NIH funding. GAO audits prompted by White Coat Waste have found that NIH shipped billions to foreign animal labs with essentially no oversight, that the NIH has never visited a foreign animal lab in over 40 years of overseeing research, and that some foreign spending isn't even tracked. This is how some spending in Wuhan went undisclosed. And no
It gets me that this dude looks like the guy from Hitman. While he's saying all this is what really makes it funny to me, because I'd imagine him just walking up and shooting somebody in the back of the head instead of saying, "We study your lab rat nuts."
No surprise, Dr. Fauci's division of NIH is responsible for 95% of the foreign aid. Continuing to send tax dollars to an authoritarian adversary's animal labs is a recipe for disaster. With Chairwoman Mace's leadership, we've been able to halt plans for wasteful and cruel testing on dogs and cats and other Fauci-funded labs. These tests have never should have been approved in the first place and were only deemed unnecessary after we
Can't look at
exposed
it.
them. Our campaigns and legislative work with the chairwoman, Reps Boebert, Kano, Luna, and many others exposed and shuttered waste like the government's largest cat lab that was feeding kittens kitten meat from Chinese wet markets. Yes, that's true. That was a cannibalism experiment. Eliminating VA testing on dogs and cats and ending nicotine tests on monkeys at the FDA. But there's much more work to be done. Taxpayers shouldn't be forced to pay billions of dollars every year for outdated, cruel, and potentially dangerous animal experiments, especially when most people oppose them. We're excited to work with you, DOJ, the administration, and others to continue cutting wasteful spending on animal experiments. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on my birthday. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I recognize Dr. Locke to please begin your opening statement.
Chairwoman Mace, Ranking Member Brown, and members of the committee.
I'm
and
not going to be able to
subcommittee,
take this
Thank you
seriously.
for inviting me to offer comments at today's hearing. My name is Paul Locke. I'm a professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm an attorney and an environmental health scientist, and a substantial portion of my work has concentrated on the uses of non-animal methodologies in research and regulatory decision-making, with an emphasis on the promise that these methods have for both reducing animal use
She
and
can't control
improving
that dog
evidence-based
back there.
decision-making. I want to state for the record that the opinions here that I offer are my own, and they do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Johns Hopkins University or the Johns Hopkins Health System. Today, I want to cover three major points. First, the scientific questions facing us increasingly call into question our reliance on animal models and demand that we move forward with more human-centric science. Second, federal agencies must play a leadership role in this transition to these new human-centric models. And third, the development and deployment of these models represent innovation and places where U.S. businesses and scientists are and must continue to be at the cutting edge. Let's start with a discussion about scientific methods and needs. The complex scientific challenges that we now face require that we move away from traditional animal models and embrace new technologies that do not involve animals, but instead incorporate human biology. These technologies include small
think it's a
engineered
little too
systems
loud in
such
the
as
room for
organs
that
on a
dog.
chip and microphysiological systems, or three-dimensional groups of cells such as organoids that mimic many of the important functions of human organs. I would also include AI in this group. Now, while there's considerable enthusiasm around the promise of these new methodologies, unless federal agencies and departments support their development and recognize their promise, they will never be able to reach their full potential. We're not going to be able to replace animals in biomedical research with the meager investments that federal agencies are now making. EPA, FDA, and NIH all
Is it
have
bad that
important
I'm now
roles to
hearing
play
50
in
Cent sing
unlocking the
about committee
potential that these
hearings, going to
technologies
committee
have
hearings on
for
his
designing
birthday?
better drugs, protecting the environment, and improving health? Based on our research, there are currently major gaps in the frameworks needed to support new methodologies, and it's imperative that the federal government step forward. The federal approach has been passive and reactive. What we need is for federal agencies and departments to lead efforts to development, implement, and use these methods. And my written testimony goes into greater information about what federal agencies can be doing, and I hope we'll have some questions on that as well. Finally, the U.S. must continue to lead the way in these technologies so that we are setting the global standards in these fields rather than following other nations. Regulatory agencies worldwide look to us for leadership. And if the U.S. leads in alternatives methods development and validation, our standards will shape international regulations, assist in the creation of U.S. high-tech jobs, and strengthen our national economic growth. So to summarize, scientific advancements have created multiple opportunities for us to develop and deploy more human-centric techniques in toxicology and biomedical research and transition away from animals in biomedical research. Championing these
I'm just thinking of the worst things in my head that I cannot say out loud right now.
Reduce the number of animals used, as well as produce data that is more relevant to human health. Federal agencies and departments must play a central role, and they have already begun to do so. However, to realize the full potential that this transition holds, our agencies and departments must do more, including dedicating additional resources and leading in efforts to validate these innovative new technologies. We cannot be world leaders given the meager resources that are now available. These markets are expanding rapidly, and several American companies
I'm just going to leave it
are
at
well
that.
positioned for success in this market space once the regulatory environment and framework is open for them. In closing, I urge the subcommittee to work with federal agencies to further develop the criteria for validation and acceptance of these new technologies within each department and in a coordinated way across multiple agencies, as well as dedicate additional resources to
The
them.
dog in the back's
Doing
like,
so will
fuck is
allow us
happening?
to reduce the number of animals in research, better inform decision-making, and advance American entrepreneurial science. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Locke. I now recognize Ms. Baker to please begin your opening statement.
Chair Mace and Ranking Member Brown and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Elizabeth Baker
Goddamn,
of the
brother.
Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I work with a team of scientists, physicians, lawyers, and other professionals
them vocal
to
cords.
move medical research, product
That's harsh.
testing, and advanced medical
no.
training away from using animals. I appreciate the subcommittee's attention to this
I'm going to
critical
offend myself
subject.
today.
Ending federally funded animal experiments is long overdue. For generations, tax dollars have paid scientists to conduct acts that would shock the conscience
course
of
not.
most Americans. Dogs, cats, monkeys, rabbits, pigs, and other animals are used in experiments that are painful, stressful, and often lethal for the animals that are subjected to them. Increasingly, it is recognized across research and testing sectors that animals are not good surrogates for humans. Over 85% of Americans that were recently polled
Yeah.
agreed that animal-based research should be phased out. Both Congress and the administration must take action to ensure that government funding and requests for animal experiments are stopped, and that instead a portion of that funding is reinvested into more effective human-based approaches. Our first recommendation is to end federal support for wasteful and ineffective animal research. Animal research does not translate to humans because there are insurmountable species
What up,
differences
Rhonda?
in our anatomy, physiology, lifespan, disease characteristics, and more. It's known that for new drugs, 9 out of
Right.
10 are going to fail in humans after they appeared successful in animals. And paying for those failures is partially why drugs can take so long,
I've seen
over a decade,
scorpions
to
fight.
develop, and
I want to
cost
see
so
hamsters.
much to develop, over $1 billion.
That might actually be more
Worse,
brutal.
relying on animal data is partially why many human diseases have no treatments and even fewer have cures. Despite this knowledge, the federal government continues to promote animal research. The National Institutes of Health funds 7 national primate research centers that house, breed, and experiment on non-human primates with little regard to actual human translation. While there are countless
I don't
examples
understand the
of
point
full
of that.
research, consider this. Since 1991, the NIH has given $15 million to a single heart failure project where dogs are subjected to multiple major surgeries. They have devices that are stabbed into their hearts, and then they're forced to run on treadmills until they die or that device malfunctions. Despite
God damn.
34 years of this work and hundreds of dead dogs, there's been no benefit to patients. Agencies across the federal government continue to fund animal experiments, even when the objective is human-based approaches, like animal experiments for human nutrition. Regulatory agencies continue to require animal testing. Congress and the administration can end these wasteful experiments by cutting egregious research, ensuring that research is not funded if these objectives can be studied without using animals, and ending the federal animal testing requirements in regulation and policy. Our second recommendation is to reinvest some of these savings from animal research and testing toward evaluation, acceptance, and use of innovative and more effective human-based approaches. Methods like organs on chips, reconstructed human tissues, sophisticated computer models have existed for some time, but they're only supported at a fraction of the funding that goes to the animal experiments. Some federal efforts have already begun accelerating innovative human-based methods. The NIH has a national center, NICEDM, that works to evaluate and advance non-animal approaches across federal agencies through a congressionally mandated committee, ICFAM. With more investment and an expanded purview, NICEDM can accelerate this work and even address the reproducibility crisis in research. A center at the NIH, NCATS, is already working to bridge the gap between medical research and product development by prioritizing innovative human-based approaches. Recently, the NIH adopted important recommendations on non-animal approaches and launched the complementary program to speed development and use of these methods. Each of these are great examples of steps in the right direction, but the current resource investments just pale in comparison to the stronghold that animal experiments have held for decades.
I'm sorry. I don't know if she's really just that oblivious to the ethical standard of it all, or is she just shilling at this point? Because it doesn't sound like normal shilling in a committee hearing, for the Dem side. I'm not sure how to take this one. This whole thing's throwing me off.
Greater support for these efforts will more quickly advance better science that leads to improved outcomes for people while avoiding animal use. There has been so much recent attention on getting Americans healthier. If we truly want to make America healthy again, we have to make science human again. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify, and I look
So you
forward
want to
to answering
cut
your questions.
men's nuts off?
Thank you all.
You
for
wanna
being
measure
here
my
today.
nuts?
I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions.
What is happening?
Mr. Goodman, in your written statement, you state the White Coat Waste Project identified at least $10 million in NIH grants for transgender animal experiments. You state that 95% of the funding came from Dr. Fauci's NIAID. Why is the federal government spending taxpayer dollars to create transgender animals?
A great question.
Your microphone.
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, I wonder why they're making cats constipated also. It's a question that rings around in my head at night when I'm going to bed, why we're funding these things. A lot of the programs that are funded do latch on to some type of social trend, and then animal experimenters use it as a money grab, as an excuse to get NIH tax funds from some, in this case, DEI grants were used to fund a lot of this.
As soon as May started talking,
abuse animals find some
when
kind
she
of
was going
excuse to
through
bring in
everything,
new
I was
money,
like, "Nah, we
and they'll
done."
switch their research
This
program
ain't
over to
civil.
something that's trendy to bring tax dollars into their university. I mean, that's part of the big problem here is that colleges and universities are taking 25 to 40% off the top of every single one of these grants for indirect costs that go into a slush fund that has nothing to do with the research. So they're willing to let experimenters do whatever they want to animals.
That's
to keep the
actually
money
true.
flowing in.
Some people might describe that as money laundering. All right, are sex change experiments that forcibly transition mice, rats, and monkeys necessary for science?
Absolutely not.
Why do these experiments at all,
Yes.
if they aren't producing useful human relevant research, why again, you think it's a money issue, follow the money?
Animal testing is big business.
As you know, I've been long vocal about animal experiments and federal funded animal testing and worked with you to prevent Fauci's plan to waste almost $2 million in taxpayer dollars to maim and murder beagle puppies, for example. Why was Dr. Fauci so insistent on poisoning these puppies, even though, as you state in your written statement, the FDA does not mandate that human drugs be studied on dogs?
So much of the problem with all of this is institutional inertia. It's that people just continue doing the same thing because that's what they've done before. There was a report that came out, the National Academy of Sciences put out a few years ago about the VA's testing on dogs that Congressman Khanna actually helped us get the NAS to conduct. And they found that most of the VA's testing on dogs was unnecessary. And not only that it was unnecessary, but one of the reasons why is that there's this circular reasoning that they use to defend it when they propose a new project. They say, well, we used dogs previously, so we're just going to use dogs again. And there's no one to break that cycle. There's not enough oversight to say, hey, maybe we don't need to do this anymore. Maybe there's a better way to do it. It's like, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's kind of the problem.
Right. And what would have happened to these beagle puppies if
the-
you not had if your organization hadn't rescued
I
them?
don't know. You still got me on the hamster
case
thing,
of those
though.
experiments.
Mhm.
Just
Those
once.
dogs
I wanna
are
see
gonna
it
be
just one time.
Force-fed and
I've
injected
never seen a
with
hamster fight.
massive doses of experimental drugs to poison them to see at what point they got sick or died. And those tests will have no relevance for the
If it's
safety
anything like
efficacy
them
of the drug
eating their
being
babies,
used.
it's going to be brutal as
Thank
fuck.
you. Dr. Locke, I have a few questions for you. Can the scientific challenges we face today be solved by relying on animal testing?
No, not all of them.
Can you briefly describe how new technologies can allow us to transition away from animal testing without hindering scientific research?
Certainly. I also want to point out that in my written testimony, I do try to lay out a roadmap for how that could happen. But basically, what we need
you
to
gonna
do is
find
we
this
need
as
to spend a
devotional
lot
candles?
more resources supporting these non-animal technologies, such as organs on a chip and organoids, so we can use those to study many of the phenomena that we're now studying in animals.
An attack on Fauci
Okay,
is an
thank you.
attack on
And,
science. So yes,
Ms.
he did say
Baker,
it.
What are your thoughts today, reading your testimony for the opportunity to testify that it's long overdue? Where do we go from here? How do we fix the problem?
I think we fix the problem by investing in what is going right. We've got to cut
Glad
a
him
lot
and
of
women
this
don't
terrible
stress eat
animal
like that.
research. We need to cut the National Primate Research Centers. We are funding these centers to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars every year. We've got to stop funding animal experiments outside the United States, as Mr. Goodman said, that have no oversight. We've got to stop. If you can meet your objectives without using animals, there's absolutely no reason that you should. And so
And I was going to say, thank you for bringing it up, the amount of money, the hundreds of millions. I recently found out in the state of South Carolina, in my district, there's a primate breeding center and testing site, Alpha Genesis. They've made, to my understanding, over $100 million from NIH over the last 20 or so years. This is a boondoggle. It is a racket. And hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, in fact, have been wasted on it. So I want to thank you all for your testimony today. Thank you for being here. I would now like to recognize my colleague, Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Again, thank you to our witnesses for being here. I think it's clear that we all agree that we do not want to see animals harmed and that there is work to be done to reduce our reliance
But
on
why is it
animals
only
for
lab
medical and
mice?
scientific research. So I'd like to start with you, Ms. Baker. Can
White
you talk about
supremacists
where
in the
you think
country
some of the
wanted
current
only to be
gaps in the oversight of animal are in the animal experimentation?
Yeah, I think we have some major issues with oversight. We don't know really how much spending is going to animal experiments. The public is largely in the dark. We try so hard to understand this information, and we have to come up with some of it on our own. It would be great if the federal government would be more transparent in this way. We do know that in
Tuskegee
2016,
experiment.
the NIH said that for fiscal year 2015, 47% of extramural grants used mice. $7.4 billion is what that would be in 2024. In 2021, NIH issued a figure that said about 8% of grants go to non-clinical, non-animal approaches. Well, non-clinical approaches really mean the animal tests or some of these or the alternatives. And so a ton of money is going into this. We wanted to understand for cancer. Cancer is one disease area where it is well known that animals are just really poor predictors of human outcomes. We get cancer differently. It behaves differently in our bodies. The failure rate for cancer drugs is 94%. We have cures for cancer in mice. We don't in humans. And so we wanted to look at what is the National Cancer Institute doing? How are they funding? What does their funding look like? And so our analysis is not perfect because it's based on, unfortunately, just the publicly available information, which is not totally transparent. But we found that 45% of their grants seem to be animal related. And so the NIH can really, I think, help by ensuring that there is transparency around this. There's also an oversight issue when
Kind of reclaim because I like to get to Dr.
Sorry, I
Locke,
just
too,
got
thank
something.
you. Dr. Locke, you talked in your testimony about several different technologies that you've worked with that are direct alternatives to animal testing. Can you speak to the success of these technologies and what Congress can do to be more supportive of the efforts to expand other innovative technologies in this space?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think there are at least two things that Congress can do. The first thing Congress can do is to really get a handle, as my colleagues have said, on how much money we're spending on these technologies. The transparency issue is severe. So since this is a committee on accountability, I would say the first thing we need to do is we need to count. We don't have that information. You don't have that information. The second thing that needs to be done is that these technologies need to be what I would call validated. And by that, I mean they need to be shown that they're relevant and reliable for a particular purpose. One of my frustrations now is that the federal agencies are not doing that. They seem to be very reactive, and they seem to want folks who are in the field to bring the data to them. And then they're going to make the decision, well, we accept this data or don't accept this data. That's a really bad situation to be in. These folks who are developing the methods are entrepreneurs, they're innovators. They have to know what kind of target they're shooting at. The third thing I would say is that we really do need to get a handle on the animal research we're doing. Again, that's an area of transparency. And we need to develop metrics so we can figure out what part of that research is actually working and what part is not working. And then, as my colleagues have suggested, I think we should be sunsetting the stuff that's not working and reinvesting that in these new methodologies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Locke. And as we move to decrease our reliance on animal experimentation, it's important to acknowledge that unfortunately there are still companies and organizations that still utilize animal testing. So what can be done to move these places toward alternative models like the ones you have mentioned?
Thank you for that question. I think there's several things that can be done. The first thing we can do, and I have some bias here as an academic, is we can train our students in these new methods. We have to move away from animal tests, and animal research is always the gold standard. The second thing we can do is we can energize the whole federal grant system to make it much more friendly so that folks who want to use these alternatives can actually go out and get research money to study them.
All right, thank you. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, thank you. I will now yield to Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate your advocacy on this and protecting so many animals against this, as we've heard, savage research that has been taking place not only in the United States, but all throughout the world. And I want to thank our witnesses today for your boldness to come out, because it seems like anytime we expose millions and billions even of dollars that are spent towards ridiculous research programs or just organizations themselves, we are lashed out at. We're called crazy and conspiracists. And I want to thank you so much for taking a bold step. I want to thank you for the White Coat Waste Project, because this is not only saving precious beagles' lives, but really exposing to the American taxpayer where their money is going. And I think we all want to be good stewards of our tax money. We are responsible for those tax dollars here in Congress, and it's our responsibility to be stewards and overseers of that. So I'm grateful for DOJ to come in alongside of us to help expose some of this and kind of get those wheels turning. But just for the folks back home, real quick, before I get into my questions, I want to just highlight 1 million seconds is 11 and a half days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years and 7 months. It's like this is a huge difference. So when we're talking about billions of dollars going towards the cruelty of animals, it is much larger than what it sounds, because it's been so watered down to hear that Congress is spending millions or billions or even trillions of dollars. God forbid if we find out what comes after a trillion, we'll start spending that too. But Mr. Goodman, since 1998, how much do you believe that the federal government has spent on animal cruelty testing?
Thank you for the question. That's, as we've been discussing, it's tough because there's not a lot of transparency about actually how much tax dollars are being spent. I would say we're probably looking at $1 trillion in spending by NIH since '98, and if about 47% of that is used for experiments on animals, $500 billion could have
Wow.
potentially been spent on animal testing since 1998.
That is an extreme number. Thank you for that. And Mr. Goodman, how much money do you think that NIAID wasted on unethical and useless and abusive testing? I would imagine it's about the same, because none of this has been very useful or effective.
Yeah, so Dr. Fauci ran NIAID from 1984 to 2022, and when he left at the end of 2022, it had a $6.5 billion budget.
Jennifer,
Again,
thank
we
you for
don't
the
know what
$1
percentage of
dono.
that was at
You're
efforts
right.
for
Fuck
animal
it.
testing, but probably higher
I
than
gotta
the
throw it in
average
Discord.
across NIH. And I just want to make a note here that Dr. Fauci, and I don't have any issue with him outside of his abuse of animals, he was not just a paper pusher. He was personally involved in animal experimentation, experimenting on monkeys, giving them HIV-like viruses until the day he left NIH. He was the lead investigator on grants that were funded by taxpayers to do that. And he started his career by infecting chimpanzees with HIV and promising we were going to have an AIDS vaccine back in the 80s, which we never got because, as you mentioned, they don't get HIV, they don't get AIDS, they don't get sick. So there's been an enormous amount of waste and abuse, and his legacy, unfortunately, he's gone from government, but his legacy at NIAID lives on.
Yes, fortunately, he has gone from government, but that doesn't prevent us from holding him accountable
There you
for
go.
not only the wasteful spending, but the cruel tests that have taken
Woman.
place over the years. So maybe you answered my next question. How many of these treatments have found cures in humans that come from this cruel kind of testing?
Virtually none. We've heard the statistics today, and any that have come, it's out of pure dumb luck, and they're the exception, not the rule, because animal experiments are a dead end. It's pure chance if something good comes out of it.
And so I'm seeing here with NIAID, the budget of spending $6.5 billion in taxpayer money. It's been used to pay EcoHealth Alliance to import hundreds of Asian bats into the U.S. for new viruses in labs in Colorado run by the Wuhan-linked researchers. That's $6.7 billion for the Colorado State University in Fort Collins to research bats here in America. And we've also sent billions of taxpayer dollars to unaccountable labs in China and other foreign countries implant aborted baby parts into lab animals. Have you heard of that sort of research?
Yeah, we did an analysis.
Look, I
a few years
immediately
ago
left
showing
Rhonda's
that
reading
over
and jumped in
90%
and did this
of
shit.
hu-
Okay. I didn't expect them to actually be on
experiments with
top.
using human fetal tissue and putting them involved animals were funded by Fauci's NIAID.
Do you know where they're getting the aborted human fetal tissue?
A lot of it is happening at colleges and universities that have affiliated hospitals that perform that procedure.
Madam Chair, I think we need to look into that as well. My time has expired. I apologize to our other witnesses. I did have questions for you, but I'll submit those in writing. Thank you.
That's wild. I would now like to recognize Mr. Subramaniam for 5 minutes.
Oh, God.
flashing.
Thank you. I'm glad we're having this hearing today. Actually had the chance to talk to
If y'all remember this guy from yesterday, he was the dude whose nostrils looked like they were just like craters in the earth kind of thing because he was so mad and yelling. Just he looked like fucking like an Indian Beavis or something. I don't even know what he is, but he looked like Beavis, just like Indian. It was weird.
an animal care program manager at a research facility.
It may be a
And
short one.
he said something really interesting. He said the
There
day
are
we
some
no
others
longer
too.
need animals for research is the day we've succeeded as an industry. So I think what you're finding that is that even the people who are employed to run these programs are starting to realize that we'd like to see a path to where we no longer need animals. And so I think that's really interesting. One of the things I would like to know though is how far away are we until the technologies can completely replace animals and we can still be on the cutting edge of science. You know, I'm an animal lover, I'm a vegan even. I very much support getting rid of animals in all testing, but I want to make sure that we also, do the cutting edge research that we need to do. I'd ask all three really, Ms. Baker, Dr. Locke, Mr. Goodman, if you could address how far away are we? And I also would love to know what kind of investment do we need? Does it have to be from the public sector? Is there, private sector, companies going after this, getting venture funding for it, for instance? I'd love to know, what we can do, what the path looks like.
Thank you for the question. There are so many incredible technologies that we have today that we should be using to be on the cutting edge. So, using animals is not cutting edge. Using animals is something that has been done for so long. The innovative approaches are not, they don't use animals. They are human biology based because we need to understand human outcomes. If we want to talk about innovation, if you look to just take a look at any other industry. Look at the phone industry. What was a phone in the 1950s versus what it is today? What was a car back then versus what it is today? What is science doing back then? What was science doing back then versus what is happening today? A lot of the regulatory tests that are done are the same exact tests that have been done since the 1950s. So if we're talking about really being on the cutting edge, we absolutely have to be embracing and supporting and investing in these approaches. It's not just our federal government. There are a lot of,
Wait, what?
there are many companies that exist today that have already developed these approaches. I think they will do much better once we do things like remove requirements for testing products on animals, because there still is so much favoritism in science for using the animal-based approaches, because people think that you have to do it if you want to get an NIH grant, you have to do it if you want to get through the FDA. And so once those things really start to change, I think we'll see a lot more investment in the government and outside.
And Dr. Locke, the same question.
Yes, thank you for the question. The good news is that at least in one area, cosmetics testing, we are pretty much out of the animal testing business. If you look at other areas, for example, testing of environmental chemicals, drugs, and discovery, we're not there yet. How long is it going to take? I always like to say it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. But no one's ever asked me to put a time on that, and I'm afraid I can't do that. I know what steps we need to take to get there, which are to really start to fund these technologies, to make sure that these technologies are valid, to get the federal government to really be very, very much of a leader in these. I do believe that we have an incredibly entrepreneurial private sector that is well positioned to be leaders in these in the world market. You're seeing all sorts of continuous funding of these from venture capitalists. You're seeing all sorts of use of these technologies in medical settings. There's a lot of personalized medicine that is being used. So the future is very bright. I think it's just really a matter of getting us on the right pathway to do that. It's not going to be something, unfortunately, I think it's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, but it could happen.
I still
in
don't. I don't.
20,
Still,
30,
I still don't
40,
see how you
maybe
reached to
not
that
even
one. But
within my
okay.
lifetime. But to be honest with you, I don't really care as long as we get on that pathway.
What up, Daisy girl?
I'm Mr. Goodman.
Oh yeah. Hey, Greg
I
McNeely.
think
How
I'm
you
a little
doing?
more optimistic. I mean, we could stop animal testing today. It's useless. It's misleading us. It's causing us to waste billions of dollars every year, decades of time and energy, and very smart people. These are some of the smartest people in the world. You cut off their funding for animal testing, they're going to figure out something else to do. The private sector is going to innovate. Stop forcing companies to test on animals. Stop doling out billions of dollars to animal experimenters who have no incentive to innovate and actually solve
She's not in
problems,
this
'cause that's what keeps
subcommittee.
the grants coming. They'll figure out another way to do it, and we're going to get solutions that way. The EPA is a great example. I know my time's up, but the EPA set a timeline in 2019. The Trump administration said by 2035, we're going to phase out all animal testing, which was great. It was lauded by Republicans, Democrats, everyone across the spectrum thought it was a great idea. Within months of that, within months of the Biden administration taking over, they killed that plan to phase the timeline to phase out animal testing at the EPA because environmental groups pushed them to do it, saying that it was an environmental justice issue that we needed to do more animal testing, not less, which is ridiculous. So I think that if you take the politics out of it, if we're concerned with science and we're concerned about being good stewards of taxpayer dollars in the public's interest,
Maybe.
we can end animal
What's up,
testing
Donut?
tomorrow.
Not me.
We're going to be fine, and we're actually going to be better off. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to recognize Mr. Crane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman, for holding this hearing today. Thank you guys for showing up. It was just yesterday in an oversight hearing that I asked Chairman Comer if we could get some therapy dogs up here because of some of the meltdowns that were going on. I had no idea I'd walk into this hearing today and see three beautiful beagle puppies. And I've noticed that my mood's already improved. So thank you guys for bringing them there. I think we should make it mandatory. We also talked about in the oversight committee hearing yesterday that some of the ridiculous programs and initiatives that need to be cut from our bloated government. And it seems like a lot of these studies are just another example of our senseless, out of control spending by bureaucrats who never really get held accountable. I want to start with you, Mr. Goodman. You said you have estimated over $20 billion in taxpayer money wasted on ineffective animal research. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Wow. Mr. Goodman, did you also say that it was your estimation that $241 million was spent for transgender animal testing?
Yes, and that's, I would say, is the floor, not the ceiling, because the information on federal databases is not, it was pretty incomplete.
At least
Do you think we're gonna find out
$241
that it was
million.
much more money than that for
Yes,
transgender animal testing?
yes.
God damn.
Can you describe what exactly the American people's taxpayer dollars were spent on regarding transgender animal testing?
Yeah, in a lot of these cases, they're involve mice, rats, monkeys who are being surgically mutilated and subjected to hormone therapies to mimic female to male or male to female gender transitions, gender affirming hormone therapies, and then looking at the biological, psychological, and physiological effects of the gender transitions, looking at the effects of taking vaccines after you've transitioned these animals from male to female or female to male, looking at the size of their genitals changing after you've put them on estrogen or testosterone therapies to transition them. And in the case that the chairwoman, the example the chairwoman gave, there was a $1.1 million
Still
grant
can't get over that.
to give female lab rats testosterone to mimic transgender male humans.
I still can't get over that. Imagine being a man. You're literally going through fucking college. You're trying to be, you know, a serious scientist. You want to make a name for yourself. You got plans. You're hired onto this testing facility. You go in for your interview. You sign all the paperwork. You come back to your wife. You're just like, hey, hun, I got a job. Yeah, what are you doing? Hear me out. I'm measuring the nuts of animals. Every day. I'll just go in there and just take a ruler to the nutsack of an animal. I couldn't imagine holding a straight face and having that conversation with my wife. I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. I'm gonna break every time, and that's just gonna pop into my head. I measure the nutsack of animals, ladies and gentlemen.
And then overdose them with this party drug to see if animals who were taking female animals taking testosterone were more likely to overdose on the sex party drug than animals who were not taking testosterone.
Mr. Goodman, are many of these taxpayer-funded animal studies shared with the public, or is there a significant oversight of this research?
You essentially needed a degree in information technology to navigate the federal spending databases to find any of this stuff.
So what you found is we're not being very transparent with what we're spending these funds on.
Not at all, and it's by design.
Did you say that Dr. Fauci, in your estimation, had funded close to 95% of these animal research projects?
Yeah, in our
True.
analysis, Dr. Fauci funded about 95% of the transgender animal experiments.
Okay, I found in
But to make an actual conclusive argument, to make actual real sense, that's a very, 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 very slim sample size. 1 out of 100 may show signs of being that out of an animal. Think of that. Like, we studied 1 out of 100 people showed signs of being transgender. So therefore you have a 1% chance of being transgender on birth. Like, you'd have to go to a larger sample size to get an actual representation of what that would be.
found in some research that the EPA under President Trump is planning to reduce the agency's animal testing by 30% by 2025 and completely by 2035. Mr. Goodman, can you explain why that's a win for the American taxpayer?
Absolutely. Animal
100%.
testing is incredibly time intensive, inaccurate, and expensive. And it's not very good at predicting the human health effects or environmental effects of chemicals and pesticides. And right now, what we are doing to test human effects is poisoning lab animals, forcing them to
I
breathe
find
wildfire
funny
smoke
situations
simulated in a
in this, but
laboratory
there
by
is
burning
nothing
different,
about this is actually funny
types
to
of
me
foliage and
as far
pumping
as the
it into
animals are
cages,
concerned.
making them obese to simulate what it
But the
would be like
jobs
for obese
behind
people to be
these,
exposed to
no,
wildfire
it's hilarious.
smoke, shooting off handguns and rifles and forcing animals to breathe the emissions and gun control experiments, and the list goes on. And that's what's happening currently at the EPA after the Biden administration overturned the Trump plan to phase out animal testing.
Mr. Goodman, one more question. You've also been outspoken about the COVID-19 outbreak stemming from Dr. Fauci's
Did this motherfucker just say they're making animals breathe in the gases expelled from shooting bullets? What? Just in case you're in a room with 50 million fucking 50 million bullets being shot off at the same exact time? Like, what is the qualification for this? That makes no sense.
U.S. funded research at China's Wuhan lab. What are the public health risks if we continue some of these outrageous animal studies?
We're flirting with disaster if we continue to fund
I'm on
dangerous
Rumble
virus
side, too.
research, both abroad, like in Colorado, where Fauci greenlit this bat lab. They're trying to import hundreds of bats from Asia to build a new lab in Colorado to do virus experiments with Ebola, Nipah, Lassa, deadly viruses for which there's no cure. It's just a matter of time before we have another pandemic on our hands if we let mad scientists run amok with our money.
Thank you. I yield back.
All right, I will now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this hearing. I have to admit,
Super
whenever I
Manya
saw
left.
the
Look at him go.
Subject line of this, I was surprised that this
The
was
only one
thing.
there is Brown.
I'm shocked. I think the American
That's
people
pretty
should
telling.
be even more shocked to find and disgusted to find out what's happening with their dollars. I think it's actually embarrassing. I can't imagine people from other countries look at this
God damn it.
country as a
I can't now. I can't not see it. Motherfucking Bubbles from the Trailer Park Boys. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm fucking wrong. That is Bubbles from the Trailer Park Boys. Images. Let's go. You got that right above my face? We got motherfucking Bubbles in our goddamn government. The fuck is happening?
Beacon and as an example, and here we are spending money, taxpayer dollars, to try to study transgender transing animals and testing them on party drugs. I mean, it's insane. My question to you, Mr. Goodman, is I understand that your organization,
The sad thing is,
White Coat
Bubbles here
Waste,
makes more sense than
helped
most of
expose
them.
the taxpayer-funded experiments on bats that led to the COVID pandemic. So can you walk us through how did you come about that? What was your investigation? How did you get the information?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Again, it's an honor to be here. In 2018, we uncovered a lab at the USDA here right outside of the Beltway where they were breeding hundreds of kittens every year and then flying to China and other foreign countries to these disgusting wet markets and buying dog and cat meat. They were then putting it in their federal employees. They were then putting it in their carry-on luggage, flying it back to the United States, and then force feeding dog and cat meat to kittens in this government laboratory
It's what I do.
in Maryland. They had spent $22 million on this project.
For what purpose?
They wanted to know if people eating dog and cat meat in China might be exposed to a particular parasite that could be carried in dog and cat meat.
Wow.
So that was when we first got a sense that taxpayer
That was
dollars.
that was the first clue. And then
Yeah,
you
so-
continue to follow that.
Unfortunately, the Trump administration shut that.
Wait. Are you talking about like doomsday sales pitches or measuring some animal's nutsack? What are we talking about here, Shane?
That project down. They adopted out the cats who were left in the lab. 2 of them went to live with my boss, the president and founder of White Coat Waste Project, Delilah and Petit.
Oh yeah, he did.
Lived happily ever after with him. But that set us on the scent of foreign aid for animal research. In late 2019, we discovered a list on the NIH website of all the labs in China receiving taxpayer dollars. And in January of 2020, we went.
There's like still 26.
Yeah.
Or how many were there at the?
There were more than 30 at the time, and there were actually labs in Russia receiving taxpayer money at the time. In January of 2020, we met with the White House to flag for them that these labs in China, including the Wuhan lab, were receiving taxpayer funding. And then in April 2020, we finally went public.
Measuring nutsacks?
Working with
That's a
Congressman Matt
niche market.
Gaetz and Joni Ernst, we went public, exposing the grant that Fauci sent to the Wuhan lab through EcoHealth Alliance to fund the gain of function experiments. And then since then, we've been working to defund EcoHealth, defund the Wuhan lab, and cut funding for all animal laboratories in adversarial nations as a matter of animal welfare, government waste, and national security.
I'm going to offend myself
what kind
today.
of sick and twisted individual comes up with a plan to have an experiment where you're going to, feed turn these animals into cannibals and see what the outcome is? Where does that come from? Like, what was the thought process? How did the PhD student who's doing the
I
research,
remember this one.
How did they make
Yeah,
that
I remember what you're talking about.
that
Don't mind me.
If
Yeah.
it tells you anything about the government's thinking, the person
There's
responsible
like
for
no
this
way.
experiment is
Uh-uh.
in the USDA's
It's not gonna
Hall
happen.
of Fame,
the name?
Dr. Doobie.
Dr. Doobie, wow. Let me ask this question. I just have a little bit more time left. Given the fact that we have got quantum computing, we have now AI, isn't there opportunities where we
Can't
can
not see it now.
if they truly are trying to do research and determine something, couldn't they run some of these, a lot of this research through, advanced technology using quantum computers, data centers?
Absolutely. And there's studies that have come out of Johns Hopkins and elsewhere showing that.
All right,
things like
sorry, Mr.
screening
Burleson,
drugs
but
and
you are now
chemicals for
Mr.
human
Bubbles.
safety are actually much more accurate and efficient using computer modeling and AI than testing on lab matter.
On a completely different species.
Correct.
Right? With completely different DNA. It would make sense. Thank you. I appreciate what you do. Thank you for exposing all of this. It's shameful that we're still sending money to these, but we will do everything. I will do everything we can to try to stop this.
Thank you so much.
It's my brain. That's how it works.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burleson. With agreement from the ranking member, the chair and ranking member will each get an additional 5 minutes to ask questions. So I'm going to yield to the ranking member first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I want to circle back to you, Ms. Baker, with regards to potential legislative solutions that Congress can do to support and increase oversight of animal experimentation.
Yeah, thank you for this question. You know, one of the things that was mentioned is the numbers of animals. It is unbelievable that in 2025 in the United States, we still don't know how many animals are used in research. The estimate is, you know, up to 100 million, but we need to know that number. And one of the reasons we don't know that number is that a lot of the animals that are used in research are not even recognized as animals under the law. Mice, rats, birds bred for research, invertebrates, they are not animals under the law. And so they are not counted. We can amend the Animal Welfare Act to count those animals by including them in the definition of animals. If there are, you know, if there's no appetite for amending the Animal Welfare Act, there are other solutions, and especially focused on federal government spending. So the NIH does require recipients of NIH funding to do some reporting, but it's not transparent and it's not accurate. Every 4 years, if you receive NIH grants every 4 years, you need to provide some assurances that you are complying with NIH policies. And in that is an average daily inventory of animals. It's just an estimate. It's not transparent. To get that information, you would have to do FOIA requests. And so there is actually some proposed legislation, the Federal Animal Research Accountability Act, that would simply that could change this. Simply put, if you receive NIH grants, then once a year you need to report on how many animals you have used, how many have been housed, bred, used in research, and that should be made transparent.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you giving your testimony today. And I think it's Mr. Goodman. I do have a question with regards, we keep hearing about the care, and I think that the gender affirming care, and I do find that concerning. Just for clarification purposes, can you let me know what is that dollar figure and where is the source from?
For those experiments,
Yes.
that's the source of that is NIH reporter website and the usaspending.gov website.
Okay, and what was the dollar figure?
Let me get it for you. And I have a spreadsheet with all of those projects.
Okay.
I'd be happy to share it. The dollar figure was $240 million in recent grants. $26 million of those are active grants.
Okay, and the
And those-
241 million is for?
So that's grants that are available in the NIH reporter database that I think we used. And again, I have this actual search saved. If you use search terms transgender and animal models, those were the hits that came up.
Okay, because I think the article that you cited in your statement indicated there was $10 million.
Yeah,
I
that
was
was
just trying to get
it-
clarity.
Yeah, that original article, that was just a subsection of a sub selection of the projects. It wasn't everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, and I will yield back.
Thank you. And I'm going to yield to myself for 5 minutes. And Congresswoman Boebert, I'm going to yield to you for a minute or two if you have, I think you had a couple extra questions you want to ask. My first question, Mr. Goodman, what is the worst animal testing experiment you've ever heard of and uncovered? There's some really bad ones out there. What is the absolute worst one you've ever heard of and uncovered?
The kitten cannibalism was pretty horrendous. Breeding kittens just to force them to eat cat meat and then killing them even though they were perfectly healthy after they collected their feces out of a litter box. I mean, that's literally what was happening. They were doing that to thousands and thousands of kittens. The DOJ until recently was stabbing, shooting, and blowing up live animals for training exercises. We were able to cut that and defund that. The experiments that the NIH funded and Fauci funded in Tunisia, where they were putting the dogs and heads in mesh cages and filling them with biting flies. Yeah, there's a lot of nightmarish stuff that we're being forced to fund, and taxpayers don't like it, and they don't even know how bad the situation
damn.
is. If they did, they would be, marching in the streets.
You're right.
And Dr. Locke, a question for you. What are the prospects of a drug therapy that fails animal testing? Is it likely to receive regulatory approval?
Thank you for your question. I'm not an expert on the drug development process, but the way you've described things, I think if the drug would not make it through the tests that are required, it would not be able to be in the market. If I could just add, though, that Congress has really looked closely at this issue about developing drugs and passed a law, the FDA Modernization Act, that removed the requirements for testing drugs. And my understanding is that there's bipartisan support for another law because Congress feels that the FDA is not moving more quickly in this area. That is the FDA Modernization Act 3.0 that would force the agency to really pay a lot more attention to using alternatives.
Okay, and then Ms. Baker, before I hand it over to Ms. Boebert, I love your idea of revisiting the Animal Welfare Act. I'd be open to working with you and finding that language and doing a bill that would insert that language to define what an animal is. I think it's very important. I'm all about small parts, big difference. Of course, I would like to eradicate animal testing altogether.
Scott McGovern
but
was
that
the only
seems
one
like
in
an
the
easy
rules
win that
committee
we
for
could
this
work
one.
on together in a nonpartisan manner. So I would love to talk to you about that, and I will yield the last 2.5 minutes to Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the NIH probably should change their acronym to FOD, Faces of Death.
Take it easy, Jisdy.
This very much sounds like a show that my mother would not
What
let
up,
me
Zach?
watch as a child. And, just hearing how egregious this is, there's many more things that I have listed here. Of course, we've heard of the beagles who were in the mesh cages. I don't know if their vocal cords were paralyzed or if they were removed, but they were prevented from barking, correct?
They were clipped.
Yeah, there was a project that Dr. Fauci funded. Actually, we worked with Chairwoman Mace to expose that they were doing drug testing where they were poisoning puppies with massive doses of drugs, and the laboratory cut there was actually a line item in the contract for a cordectomy.
Wow.
To cut the vocal cords so the dogs would not bark in the lab.
Wow. And so we've heard that. We've heard of electroshock therapy, even to the point where cats had their spinal cords exposed, their back sliced open, and that electroshock therapy was given to test for erectile dysfunction and cognitive issues and so many other things. And so I ended my last round of questioning talking about the implantation of aborted fetal tissues. And you said that universities partner with clinics who are performing these abortions. Now, how does that process work and who funds that? Are the mothers of these aborted babies giving permission? Do they know it's taking place? Is there taxpayer funding in the crosshairs of that other than the actual testing itself?
That's outside of my wheelhouse.
Okay, that again, Madam Chair, I think this is something we should look into. I would love to see just what permissions are granted and given for that. I know that we have some regulatory framework within the Department of Health and Human Services and the Public Health Service Act, and regulations include prohibitions on buying or selling the tissue of valuable consideration, but also, but they allow for compensation for costs associated with the tissue healing.
Sorry, guys, this is my
And so
day.
I would love to look into that.
Normally.
So not only can we prevent the cruelty,
Except
of
I'm
the
usually
animals
not
like
on
these
camera and
beautiful
pulling
beagles we
cable.
see here today, but also even our children who are being harmed in this process as well, for whatever reason it may be. But Madam Chair, I would love to continue to work with you on this and hold Dr. Fauci, the NIH, NIAID, and everyone else accountable for this wasteful spending, and I yield.
Thank you. I'd now like to yield 5 minutes to Mr. McGuire.
Turn your fucking mic on.
All right, the new guy is learning. All right, thank you, Chairwoman.
You're doing great.
Thank you for bringing this egregious and evil issue to my attention. I don't think anyone in my district or our country would approve. I want to thank you for our witnesses for coming in. As a veteran, as a Navy SEAL, we use dogs and they save many lives. We call them furry missiles. And my wife and I have a great Pyrenees, and our dog is part of the family. And I was not aware of what you've brought to our attention.
Furry
And
missiles?
after listening to it, the chairwoman talked about this being a bipartisan issue.
Never
It
mind.
should be.
You're
It's
prior
definitely,
military. I
evidence
understand.
that evil does exist. And we spend more in our
I'm gonna
country
turn my
per
camera off
day
real
than we
quick.
bring in per day, which is going to sink this country if you don't get under control. I cannot believe the amount of money that we are spending to do these crazy things. I want to start with Dr. Locke. Approximately how many drugs are on the market today rely on safety and efficacy data from multiple animal models before being allowed to move to human clinical trials?
Thank you for your question. I don't have a good figure for you other than to say that as you correctly stated, the law requires safety and efficacy. And before the FDA Modernization Act was passed, and probably even after it was passed, most of those drugs almost certainly had to go through some sort of animal testing. But I can't put a number on it, I'm sorry.
No worries. I strongly advocate for the welfare of animals. Dr. Locke, would you agree that eliminating animal testing entirely from the research and development of drugs and vaccine could significantly hinder our ability to assess safety and efficacy, potentially delaying life-saving treatments?
At the present time, we would need to transition away from animals. Yes, I do agree with that statement.
That's what I think. All right, Dr. Locke, given your knowledge in alternative testing models, can you briefly list and describe different examples of technological alternatives?
Yes, thank you for your question. One of the ones I mentioned in my testimony are these things called organs on a chip, which are just like what they sound like. They're small engineered devices, and they mimic the organs that we have in our body. So there's a lung on a chip, there's a heart on a chip, there's a liver on a chip, and those don't have exactly the same the same functions that our organs do, but they have enough so that you can make good decisions based on the biology that you learn from those. In many cases, you can actually put human cells in there. You're putting human cells in there to study chemicals. And you can also begin to link these together to get a whole body on a chip. Another area where we've had a lot of advances in developing these things called organoids. So organoids are groups of cells from, let's say, a brain or a liver or a heart, and you put them in a dish and they actually organize themselves into something that looks like a human organ, but it's not exactly the same. But again, it has enough function so you can study it and you can expose it to chemicals and you can expose it to other things so that you might know what it is going to impact it. The important thing to remember about these two is that in terms of cost effectiveness, you can put these in a well plate and you can do many, many studies at the same time. Unlike with animals where you have a very, very slow throughput, these you have either a medium or a high throughput. So those are two examples that I'm most familiar with. Our other witnesses have mentioned AI, computational models. That's another very, very powerful one. But we have all these unbelievable techniques now where we can actually use these for personalized medicine. So I think everyone here has a medical school in their district or a university in their district that does this. But for example, if I was suffering from a disease and there were two options for treatment for that disease, and one was, let's say, a chemical and the other was a radiation treatment, you could actually take cells from my body and you could regress those cells to stem cells, then make them organ cells.
I apologize, I'm running out of time. I have another question. I wish I had a list of the egregious things that my colleague Lauren Boebert listed. I couldn't believe half of or any of them. But I heard them mention kitten cannibalism, which is unbelievable. Is that true? And if so, where did it happen? When did it happen? What did they think they were going to achieve?
I don't have any information on that question. I'm sorry.
Does any of the witnesses have?
Yeah, my organization exposed that in 2018. The USDA's Agricultural Research Service, ARS, and in Beltsville had a lab where they were breeding hundreds of kittens every year and doing feeding experiments with them, including going to wet markets in China and Brazil and other places, buying dog and cat meat, bringing it back to the United States and force feeding that meat to kittens for studies looking at the prevalence of toxoplasmosis in dog and cat meat in wet markets abroad.
Proof that evil does exist. Thank you, Chairwoman, for bringing this to our attention. And hopefully we
Sorry,
can
guys,
stop
I'm in the
this evil.
background here doing some.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I would now like to yield to Ranking Member Brown for any brief closing remarks she may have.
Just want to thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to doing some good work on this subcommittee.
And I want to thank the ranking member, and I look forward to working with you. And in fact, we were just talking offline here. I was saying I want to get on her bill about cosmetics and animal testing. So all good things today. Today's conversation builds upon the work that I and many of us on oversight and throughout Congress have been working on for years to end animal testing. There are many of us up here, and we're not working fast enough. We're trying as hard as we can. So we appreciate the witnesses being here today. Last Congress, I introduced the Preventing Animal Abuse and Waste Act to prohibit the NIH from conducting or funding research that causes significant pain or distress to cats or dogs. As an animal lover, I've been disturbed to learn about these barbaric and unnecessary experiments to create transgender mice, rats, and monkeys. I, like most humans, have a deep adoration and love for all of God's creatures, including our animals. And one of my earliest memories as a child was being in Hampton, South Carolina. I was like 4 years old, and my grandmother just made some great biscuits and breakfast, and she gave me this bright pink
Right.
album, and it was just full of pictures of animals from the newspaper from Hampton. And ever since then, I've just loved them so much. And I grew up with 7 pets. We had 3 dogs, 3 cats, and a parrot named Julio. And so it's just important for the work that we're doing that all of God's creatures, all animals, are treated with respect and dignity and love, and that they're not murdered and maimed and killed in on these horrific experiments. So this Congress, I will continue to fight to end all animal testing, including by introducing legislation that prohibits use of federal funds for these cruel animal sex change experiments. Thank you again to our panelists. The issue of taxpayer-funded animal cruelty deserves our time and attention. I'm thankful for your expert testimony today. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will then be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. And we are now adjourned.
$241 million that we know of for weird ass animal testing. Again, including hiring somebody to measure the nutsack of animals. I'm sorry, I just can't get past that point. That's just something that's going to be stuck in my head for all that time. But I do have one more that I haven't heard. We're actually going to dive in like together on this one. We just heard that one live. This one actually happened almost about 2 days ago, actually. This comes from the House Rules Committee. These are the ones that when you have your bills that come to the House floor for them to vote on, it has to go through the House Rules Committee to say, okay, we need to add this amendment. We need to take this amendment away. Let's change the wording of this. Let's change this. This is where the bills become worded and changed into something that is debated on the House floor, then voted upon to go further into the Senate and everything like that. But this is that community, or not that community. This is that committee, the House Rules Committee. These are where the stupid arguments really fucking come from. The worst of the worst in this group would have to be Jim McGovern and Ledger Fernandez. Which, by the voting on this one, it doesn't look like Ledger Fernandez was in that hearing, or in this House Rules hearing. So, but like I said, I don't know. First time I'm going to hear it. Let's hit it.
Illicit fentanyl and its analogs are responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of.
Oh yeah, this is about HR 27. What is it? Right here. HR 27, halt all lethal trafficking of fentanyl acts. Even in this one, Marjorie Taylor Greene put in a fucking amendment that if you're found guilty, you're put to death. That's right. Where is it? Green, right here, version 2. Revised imposes the death penalty for anyone who knowingly imports fentanyl or fentanyl-related substances across the southern border. That's that bill. But let's hear what they got to say about it and how they're gonna twist it around to make good or not.
Americans every single year. Fentanyl
I gotta take myself
destroys
off screen again. Hold up.
families, communities, and poses a serious threat to the health and safety of millions of Americans. For context, in 2022, the DEA seized over 379
Pretty much.
million doses of fentanyl. That's enough to kill every single American. And with the open border policies of the previous administrations that are now thankfully being reversed by President Trump, the stream of fentanyl into the United States over the last 4 decades went unimpeded. Something must be done to change the trajectory, and HR 27 offers a solution. This legislation would permanently place fentanyl analogs into Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, simplify registration processes for certain research with Schedule 1 substances, provide for exemption of individual analogs from Schedule 1 when evidence demonstrates it is appropriate. Last Congress, the HALT Fentanyl Act received sizable bipartisan support, with 74 Democrats voting yes alongside Republicans. I hope this time around that more of our colleagues across the aisle will join us. Everyone in this room has certainly read stories or seen news coverage of how illicit fentanyl has wreaked havoc upon our country. One life lost to fentanyl is too many. One life ensnared by an addiction to fentanyl is too many. All of us agree to that. Again, this bipartisan legislation offers us the opportunity to make significant headway in addressing a serious issue that continues to affect our nation. I look forward to the discussion on this legislation, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are here to consider HR 27, the Halt Fentanyl Act. As we all know, the opioid epidemic, especially the fentanyl crisis, is a devastating tragedy.
This dude is a
It
fucking
continues to take lives,
one of the biggest dicks.
destroy families, and wreak havoc on communities all across this country. We have to figure out a way to work together to keep drugs off our streets, to prevent addiction, and support those who are struggling with recovery. But for us to have a constructive conversation tonight, I think we need to set the record straight about a few things. Just last week, while some of my friends were at the Trump Doral Resort in Miami, the Trump administration tried to suspend vital funding that provides Americans benefits that keep them safe, healthy, fed, and afloat. We're talking about freezing things like Medicaid, WIC, Meals on Wheels, and even veterans benefits. Let's be clear. This freeze would have also blocked hundreds of billions of dollars in bipartisan funding for law enforcement, substance abuse treatment, homeland security activities, and funds to specifically combat the fentanyl crisis. And all of this chaos was spun with the help of many Republicans, including some on this committee. State and local law enforcement assistance, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program, all on the chopping block. And so I don't want to be lectured about the fentanyl crisis after Republicans tried to blow up the programs to keep it off our streets.
See what I'm
Donald
talking
Trump
about?
made it a priority his first week in office to pardon Ross Ulbricht. This is the guy who was sentenced to life in federal prison for making fentanyl widely available to online consumers.
No, sir. He was sentenced to federal prison for running a damn website where you could buy or sell anything that you had. It had absolutely nothing to do with the actual people that were selling drugs on his site. That'd be kind of like, that'd be like that'd be like holding Jeff Bezos accountable for somebody getting scammed on Amazon. That's not a thing, asshole. But y'all went after him because he was a target. He was somebody where you could just do something about very fucking quickly and then just end the argument altogether. Absolutely fucking not. Y'all with this lawfare shit, that shit's about to bite you in the ass.
That's right. One of his first acts was to pardon a notorious convicted fentanyl supplier. I don't know. I think there's kind of a disconnect here. You back the blue by pardoning people who beat police officers. You're fighting fentanyl by pardoning an online drug kingpin whose website contributed to fentanyl pouring into our country. Your big idea to lower the deficit is to cut an agency that represents 1% of the federal budget and then give 10 times that amount in tax breaks for those who are well off and well connected. So the people I talk to, those on the front lines of this crisis,
I
expect more
really
of
don't
us.
understand how you're trying to
They're
bring
sick
Trump
of
policy into
empty
this.
rhetoric. We need comprehensive, evidence-based ideas to tackle this crisis, to prevent addiction, and to keep fentanyl off our streets.
If you don't want empty rhetoric, shut the fuck
current
up.
leader of the Republican Party is pardoning a guy who let the fentanyl flood in. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I welcome our first panel, Representative Griffith and Representative DeGette from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. I remind witnesses that your full statement may be submitted for the record and we ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes or less. Representative Griffith, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, most members in this chamber know someone who's been affected by the drug overdose epidemic plaguing our country. According to the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in 2023, there were more than 107,000 overdose deaths that occurred in the United States. These staggering numbers are due in large part to increasing presence of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, which are approximately 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. The lethal dose of fentanyl is just 2 milligrams, or about 4 grains of sand. A loophole that the Mexican cartels use to traffic illicit, or have tried to use to traffic illicit fentanyl into our country, is to change one of the components of the molecular structure of fentanyl to create a fentanyl analog. The cartels did this in an attempt to evade our criminal laws. Right now, fentanyl analogs are considered Schedule I substances, but only because of a series of temporary scheduling orders, which are now set to expire on March 31st of this year. Along with my colleague, Mr. Latta from Ohio, that's why we have introduced H.R. 27, the HALT Fentanyl Act. This bill aims to curb overdose deaths by permanently scheduling fentanyl analogs as Schedule I substances. This will strengthen law enforcement's ability to prosecute fentanyl traffickers and act as a deterrent. The HALT Fentanyl Act also promotes research by improving the registration process to eligible individuals so that they can conduct studies on those substances with appropriate safeguards. In the Energy and Commerce Committee, we've heard testimony there may be as many as 4,800 different fentanyl analogs. Our experts at NIH, FDA, and other research institutions have studied roughly 30 to 40 of those 4,800 analogs. By encouraging research of Schedule I substances like fentanyl analogs, we can better understand how these substances work and how we can prevent potential harmful impacts in the future. And we may even find a better analog than the form of fentanyl that is currently in use. So far, we haven't, but it is possible. Because fentanyl has proven medicinal use, it is considered a Schedule II narcotic. But illicit derivatives of fentanyl, also called fentanyl analogs, currently have not demonstrated medical value. Let me be clear. This bill will have no impact whatsoever on a physician's ability to administer fentanyl in medical settings. HALT that deals specifically with the analogs, not medicinal fentanyl. The Biden administration even released a statement when this bill passed through the House last Congress, stating that they supported permanent scheduling and streamlined research for fentanyl-related substances. We must address this bipartisan issue immediately and not allow the temporary extension to expire. Once fentanyl analogs are permanently placed in Schedule I, Congress will continue to build off this work to continue to address the illicit fentanyl crisis. This is not a bill to fix everything. It fixes one problem. According to a 2021 GAO report, there was a 90% decrease in these fentanyl analogs coming into our country the year they were placed into the Schedule I temporary listing as Schedule I. This bill is a critical step in combating the opioid crisis in our country because China and Mexico are heavily involved in the business. China is sending the precursors of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs to the cartels in Mexico, who then cook it up, formulate it, and bring it into our country across the border. By making these analogs permanently Schedule I, it removes the incentive to traffic these analog forms of fentanyl into our country. China even realized the risk of fentanyl analogs and permanently scheduled these analogs on their strictest schedule. Other countries have followed suit and done the same. Last Congress, this bill cleared through Energy and Commerce on a bipartisan basis and then passed on the floor with 74 Democrats voting in favor of it. The bill has the support of many law enforcement agencies and other entities calling for the need to pass this bill as it is. We must act quickly to make the scheduling order permanent before it expires in just a few weeks. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Griffith. Representative DeGette, you are now recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Democrats on the Energy and Commerce Committee and I all want to work with our Republican colleagues to address the opioid crisis that has touched all of our communities. The best way to approach this crisis is through a multi-pronged
Laura
strategy
tabs
that
out, too.
includes public safety, public health, and science.
God damn,
HR
man.
27, the
You don't have to
the
yell.
HALT
Lower
Fentanyl
tabs
Act,
out, too.
attempts to solve the issue of emerging drug threats through incarceration only, as this bill doubles down on mandatory minimums for fentanyl-related substances. Last Congress, my Democratic colleagues and I shared our concerns about the partisan approach of the HALT Act. We called for a bipartisan solution, the Save Americans from Fentanyl Safety Act, or SAFE Act, which encompasses both a public safety and a public health approach. Despite the bipartisan solution
Yeah.
presented by Representative Pappas, once again, we're retreading the same path that went nowhere in the Senate last Congress. Rescheduling fentanyl as a Schedule 1 substance will, in and of itself, not prevent one death. The HALT Fentanyl Act does nothing to provide law enforcement or public health agencies with additional resources to detect and to intercept illicit drugs at legal ports of entry, nor does it provide resources for prevention, treatment, or recovery efforts for those already experiencing substance use disorder. But the majority pushing through the HALT Fentanyl Act shows that they believe that the best way out of this crisis is through incarceration, which simply is not a viable or effective strategy. Additionally, the HALT Fentanyl Act's provision of a class-wide permanent scheduling action for FRS based only on chemical structure sets a dangerous precedent. All other class-wide scheduling orders require an evaluation of a substance's pharmacological effect. Moving forward with the HALT Fentanyl Act curbs this long-lasting precedent and puts us on an unsure path to the future. All of us do agree that FRS do pose a threat to public health, but the DEA has only encountered 37 existing FRSs, and we're still unsure about their pharmacological effects. By implementing
easy,
this
Jennifer.
permanent scheduling without off-ramps for FRS, once we have established their effects, we will exacerbate the incarceration rates that we have with the punitive mandatory minimum provision and exacerbate existing inequities in the criminal justice system. But as Mr. McGovern said, that's not the only thing that the administration is exacerbating with their recent actions. Frankly, the Trump administration has withheld important funding to these critical programs that we need to stop fentanyl. The Trump administration's attempt to freeze federal funding last week for critical programs at HHS puts all of our communities at risk of losing the progress that we have made in addressing the opioid epidemic. The irresponsible and illegal attempt to withhold federal grant awards impacts all of our communities, including over $12 million in substance use grants through the CDC, NIH, and SAMHSA in the district of the chair of this committee in North Carolina. Our communities depend on these funds to support proven public health prevention and treatment for vulnerable populations. It's bewildering to me that there are people on this committee who are silently standing by while mental health programs wonder how they're going to pay their providers. Hospitals are cutting services, and researchers' funding applications are stuck in limbo. In the OMB memo issued last
Shouldn't have
Monday
fucked around.
evening,
Now you're
which
finding
ordered
out.
the unconstitutional funding freeze, this administration targeted programs including certified community behavioral health clinics demonstration grants. Grants like these are critical as they support clinicians in their efforts to assist with prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance use disorder. Is this also the majority's plan to say?
This dude in the back. Who's that dude that's always running around in a suit that makes those little videos about how he's supposed to have like this gigantic ass? He looks like that guy.
Save America from the grips of the opioid epidemic, starve our communities from opioid treatment help, leave the most vulnerable without services, and those who are valiantly attempting to care for them in their lifetimes. Mr. Chairman, that is why I cannot support this underlying bill in its current form, and I will not sit by and abide our president unilaterally handicapping this body's constitutional rights. I ask the members of this committee to learn from the mistakes last Congress and to not push this partisan legislation through the floor, ignoring calls to work together on bipartisan legislation to address this crisis. Return the legislation to the Energy and Commerce Committee, where we can roll up our sleeves and we can work on a bipartisan, comprehensive solution that will work for all of those suffering. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments, both of our witnesses. I now recognize myself for questions. Representative Griffith, how does this legislation address the issue raised by our Democratic colleagues who believe that the bill would prohibit access to fentanyl for medical purposes?
Donuts over there in
or
the
prohibit
the
research?
rumble chat
Yeah,
just going off
that's a
about
red herring.
about
That is
these
not
studies.
accurate. The bill specifically excludes out the fentanyl that's currently used for medicinal purposes
Who
from
was that
being impacted by this bill. So that would not apply. This is only applied to the analogs or the fentanyl-related substances that Ms. DeGette mentioned.
Frankie
So
LaPena, that was it.
that would not be a problem.
In looking to the temporary scheduling that's already on the books for these substances, did the pharmaceutical industry, researchers, or any other relevant entities express concern that the scheduling prevented the development of new medicines?
No, particularly because we have the research component built in there so that people can research. If there is a new medicine capable, then there's an expedited ability to get that information to the Attorney General, as the law currently reads, to reschedule. But that's why we wanted to have the research component in there. I felt very strongly about that when we first put this bill.
All right. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. This is that Frankie LaPena guy that I was talking about. That's that dude that makes videos about having that prosthetic that makes him look like he has a big ass. The dude right here is sitting behind him with the mustache. We're hitting uncanny valley time today, ladies and gentlemen. What the fuck is happening? Are we just cloning motherfuckers, or like if this dude gained a little fucking weight, it'd be spot the fuck on.
A couple of years ago, that we not have an end because we may
I guess
find
that wouldn't be
something that works.
uncanny
So
valley
far, they
because
have
that has
not.
to do with actual AI
But
looking
they
human.
might. And so I don't want to
Just enough to wig you the fuck out.
So we put it in there that the research would be able to be continued and go forward.
Well, thank you. And finally, within hours of President Trump being sworn in, he signed a series of executive orders to secure our border and deport criminal illegal aliens. As of today, he has brought Mexico to the table and secured a guarantee that they'll send 10,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to stop the flow of people in these deadly substances. Had President Biden responded with the same forcefulness and resolve at our southern border at any point in his 4 years in the White House, would have made a difference in terms of lives saved in communities protected from fentanyl-related substances.
I don't think there's any question. And as I said earlier, this is one piece of the formula. I think too often people want to have big, broad bills that cover everything, and those are even more difficult to pass than something like this. But this bill deals with one specific problem that we saw, and both parties have voted to extend the temporary scheduling of Schedule 1. The problem is that bill, or that temporary scheduling of Schedule 1, doesn't have the research component, but it had the effect, as I said in my testimony, it had the effect of shutting down the attempts to play legal games with bringing in illegal fentanyl by claiming, oh, it's a right-handed molecule instead of a left-handed molecule, therefore you can't charge us. Those games ended with the temporary. This will make it permanent and open up the doors for research.
Excellent. Thank you, Representative Griffith. I appreciate your leadership in this legislative area once again this Congress. The American people suffered for 4 long years under an administration that time and again refused to take seriously the flood of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl-related deaths were brought into all of our communities, all 50 states, rural, urban, suburban, every socioeconomic corner. Thousands of Americans have died from overdoses. Millions of families have been torn apart. Our towns and our cities have suffered from the blight of crime and homelessness that have grown from this epidemic. Enough is enough, and I'm excited that we're moving ahead with this bill this week. And we thankfully have a president who's willing to use every tool at his disposal to put the health and the safety of Americans first. I'm very proud to co-sponsor this bill with Mr. Griffith. Now I will yield the floor to Mr. McGovern for his questions.
Here we go.
President Hu just
The
brought up
stupidity.
drug kingpin. Before I get to my questions, Mr. Gett, did you want to respond to anything?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. Two
Please.
things. First of all, it's incorrect that the Democrats are arguing that the bill would prevent medical research. We're not arguing that. In fact, quite the opposite. We're arguing that enshrining this in Schedule 1 would prevent us from looking at all of the potential effects of this molecular structure. And so we actually think research should continue. But what it would do by putting it in Schedule 1 is it would automatically increase the mandatory minimum sentence without any of the other things I talked about in my opening statement that we need to have to prevent fentanyl and then to have treatment. The second thing that I just want to respond to, the chairman mentioned the short-lived tariffs on Mexico that President Trump tried to impose the other day. And he asked the question of my friend and colleague, Mr. Griffith, about sending 10,000 troops to the border. I would just point out for the record that those 10,000 troops were already at the border because they were requested by President Biden to go to the border. So I know President Trump took credit like he always does, but in fact, those troops were already there under the Biden administration.
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to.
Those troops were already there under the Biden administration because the Biden administration had sent in the National Guard after Texas said, fine, you don't want to take care of our border? We'll do it. And Biden said, no, that's my territory. You can't do anything about that. And they said, fuck around and find out. Then Biden put a pause on all their liquid natural gas exportation and threw our fucking troops down there to allow them in, to usher them in, to raise up the razor wire, to cut the razor wire, to make sure these motherfuckers got in.
To save face, but in any event, Mr. Griffith, I want to start by reiterating what I said in my opening. Our fentanyl crisis is a tragedy, and it deserves a serious response from Congress. But I want to ask you about an amendment sponsored by your Republican colleague, Representative Green. It's the same amendment she submitted last year when we considered the same bill. Her amendment would
You're correct
impose
about
a
that.
mandatory minimum death penalty on people
That's
who
what
traffic fentanyl
Donut was
across the
saying
southern
over there
border.
on Rumble.
I think the amendment is likely unconstitutional, and it's certainly not a serious response to our fentanyl crisis. But that aside, I have a few questions for you. We know that the vast majority of fentanyl that is seized, 90%, according to Customs and Border Protection, actually comes through legal ports of entry. The head of the Drug Enforcement Administration recently testified before Congress, confirming that the vast majority of fentanyl is coming through legal ports of entry, according to their investigations. And as we know, much of the fentanyl crisis is actually being fueled by drug cartels. You yourself actually said that on, I think, X last week. We know that these cartels are being propped up by U.S. firearms. Democrats actually tried last year to disrupt the smuggling of U.S. firearms across the southern border, and the Republicans blocked that amendment. So here's my questions. I mean, one, would you support an amendment to disrupt the smuggling of U.S. firearms across the southern border?
So the question would be that the cartels are smuggling U.S. firearms out of the U.S. and into Mexico.
We're smuggling firearms.
I'd have to see the amendment, but I'm against smuggling across our southern border, whether it's stuff going from the U.S. into Mexico or from Mexico into the U.S., which is why we need to have our border patrol strengthened and have them actually focused on protecting our border. And if you protect it from stuff coming in from the south, you would naturally catch things going
Well,
from
maybe we
north
could,
to
maybe we
south,
could
as
find
opposed to just
an
south to
amendment that
north.
you can work with us on to.
I'd be happy to look
restrict
at, I'd be happy
the
to look at
smuggling
anything
of-
to stop illegal activity on the border.
To restrict the smuggling of U.S. firearms to these drug cartels, which
Mm.
they use to obviously kill people and to intimidate people.
I would say to the gentleman, it would probably be better if we just focused on smuggling and not particular items, but anything that's illegal to smuggle across the border.
Do you support Ms. Green's amendment to impose the death penalty on people who smuggle fentanyl across the southern border And do you support making it an order?
Haven't thought through that one yet, but my gut reaction is that I always try to take death penalty issues very seriously. I have voted for some increases in the death penalty in my years in legislative bodies, and I take that very seriously, and I think it probably needs to be a standalone bill. But I will take a look at it, and I don't know that I can give you an answer at this moment. I'm sure within the next hour I will have to be determined to do it, but I'm not sure that it applies to this bill. I personally think it's an expansion beyond the scope of what this bill is attempting to do. So I would not think that it would be an order on this bill, but a standalone bill, I would have to evaluate and make a decision on that at a later time.
So does that mean you would not favor making it an order?
I do not favor making it an order because it is not the direction that this bill is going in. What we're trying to do is to make it so that the drug cartels cannot play games with the chemical formula of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs or fentanyl-related substances.
And I just have one other question for you. I mean, while we're on the topic of mandatory minimums, a concept that I find is often counterproductive, unjust, and systemically applied with racial disparities. But do you support increasing mandatory minimums for people who beat cops?
Again, you're asking me something that I don't have in front of me, and I read everything before I make a final decision on it. So let me say this about mandatory minimums. I'm always hesitant on mandatory minimums because I, as a recovering attorney who practiced as a criminal defense attorney for many, many years, I recognize that the judges.
The statute of limitations for gun smuggling is generally 5 years, as stated in 18 U.S. Code 3282. However, for specific cases involving firearms, such as importation, the statute of limitations can extend to 6 years or 60 months. This longer period applies to non-capital crimes related to gun possession or importation. Non-capital crimes. So I guarantee you, if it went to federal, I don't know. The longer period applies to non-capital crimes, but it's generally 5 years. So I guess it'd be 5 years.
Oftentimes can make decisions based on facts, and every fact pattern is a little bit different. And so I'm hesitant to do any mandatory minimums when they're not necessary. I see this one as a little bit different than what some people might see it, and that is that what we're really doing is just keeping the cartels from playing games with the chemical composition of fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances or analogs. And so we're not actually creating a new mandatory minimum. We're just making sure that if you're trying to play games, you're not going to get away with claiming it's not fentanyl when you and I both know it is.
So if I'm understanding the answer to the question, you do not support increasing mandatory minimums for people who beat cops?
I did not say that.
So you are for?
I would have to materially consider the bill and its full ramifications when I saw that bill. I do not have that bill in front of me
And the
today.
reason why I ask is because the president released from prison and pardoned violent criminals who assaulted police officers. And I actually, appreciate you saying that the people who assaulted police officers on January 6th deserve prison time. Some of your
They've been in
colleagues have
prison.
refused to condemn the violence against law enforcement that day. So I have one last question.
3 years
for you.
is a
Do you
long
support the
time for
president's
punching a
decision
cop.
to pardon
They're throwing a
violent
fucking
people who
water
beat
bottle at
cops
him.
on January 6th?
I did not have every case in front of me, but I would be, I think it is a difficult decision, and I would have had a hard time pardoning people who
Every time, Rhino.
assaulted police officers.
Every
on
time.
any occasion.
Thank you. I have no further questions. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, is now recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee. I thank the gentleman for bringing this legislation before us. I too share your desire to eliminate the ability of not just cartels, but all of those that are moving fentanyl and using the ability to kind of obfuscate and then have the
Right.
precursors and the things that create fentanyl.
He pardoned a fucking
make it much
judge
more
that was
complex
paying
for law
people
enforcement
to shove kids into the
result
fucking,
in
or that was
fentanyl
getting
that is
paid to
far
shove
more,
kids in the
deadly.
fucking juvenile
And
detention.
is, I think, a key reason for why we've had so many deaths across the country. So I think what you're trying to do here is the right thing to do. And I understand some of the questions that are raised. I just think the bill's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. But I wanted to give the gentleman the ability to expand on that point about you were just alluding to in your question, the simplicity of the legislation. And just for the record, repeat why precisely you think it's important that we have on Schedule 1 these core components of fentanyl that are currently able to be used to game the system by cartels and illegal actors in the United States.
Yeah, well, what brought the original temporary scheduling into place was the fact that the cartels were trying to argue in court that because the molecule didn't line up exactly with the definition of fentanyl that's used medicinally, even though it would have the same impacts and is a fentanyl-related substance or fentanyl analog, that they therefore were not guilty of as charged. And this eliminates that argument. And as we saw from the data, 90% of the people trying to do that was eliminated once we scheduled it temporarily. We need to make that permanent. So they saw a drop in the people who were trying to play games with the formula as soon as we scheduled it as a Schedule 1 temporarily. So we already saw the benefit, but if we let it expire in March, we lose that benefit and they'll go back to playing that game, looking then for a judge who will say that's not real fentanyl, case dismissed. And then we have somebody who should have gone through the justice system, escaping punishment for having done illegal activity. And this just makes it simple that you don't have to have the exact same molecule, but it has to be a fentanyl-related substance or fentanyl analog.
Now, fentanyl itself is a Schedule 2 drug because of its medicinal uses, correct? And so the point here is that we're not moving fentanyl itself to Schedule 1.
That is
but
correct.
We're just saying how these precursors or these components can be used illicitly. That's the goal here of why putting it to Schedule 1.
It helps when you put people together that have at least common sense
Schedule 1
to
drugs
figure out a
are
problem.
allowed to have federally approved research, right? So that research is able to proceed, and it's up to administrations to expedite that and move it along as necessary. Is that correct?
That is correct, but this bill does make that process a little bit easier for people who are trying to do
Operation
medical
Fast
research
and
on the
Furious?
fentanyl analogs or fentanyl-related substances.
Well, and
I use those terms interchangeably. It's actually defined, I think, as fentanyl-related substances.
I appreciate that. I mean, and I would just note that this matters a great deal. Obviously, I was listening to Derek Maltz, the new DEA administrator, that about why important this is. He's a good friend. I've recounted numerous times in this committee and the Judiciary Committee the number of people who have died from fentanyl. Of course, all of us are touched by it in every district across the country. I know you are in Southwest Virginia. I certainly am. I mean, Hayes County, Texas, southwest of Austin, we had 6 kids die from fentanyl poisonings in the last school year in the school district in which I live, where my family and I live in Hayes County. And we had many others who had to be resuscitated with Narcan and other, situations. And I think we had something like almost 3,000 who died across the state of Texas, fairly significant numbers. So obviously it's really critically important that we move on this. And obviously we're in rapid engagement in trying to push back on the cartels, and they're responding. We're seeing that, and we saw some activity yesterday that some Border Patrol agents sent me video of cartels literally using drones and bombing themselves with explosives. There was reports today of cartels engagement with the Border Patrol agents and firing on them. Obviously, we've had the president's engagement with the state of Mexico in terms of what's happening with putting more forces on the northern border. Whatever conversations occurred or didn't occur with the previous administration, we're seeing action now that is dramatically reducing the number of people flowing across the border. That's just factually obvious and true. And so now we're down to something like, I think I saw 400 and something apprehensions a day was reported by Bill Melugin just yesterday, which are historic lows and trending in the right direction. I hope we can get that close to zero so that, as you said, we can get Border Patrol focusing on, ports of entry and, making sure that's operating, and then between the ports of entry, stopping the flow of illicit traffic. I would just, I would ask the gentleman on the thing about the mandatory minimums, and whether we agree or disagree on mandatory minimums generally. I hear your sensitivity, and me too, about having any kind of like blanket, minimums that pull judgment out of it. Although my experience as a prosecutor on the other side of the table was that you still had flexibility even within the mandatory minimum framework, but in terms of how we applied. But at the end of the day, with the mandatory minimums, Wasn't that a response to judges who were effectively walking away from their duty to ensure that criminals weren't put in jail?
That is
I
correct.
mean, isn't that why they existed?
That is correct. And oftentimes I did find it in my criminal defense work that judges would try to figure out ways to ameliorate the mandatory minimum, not to get rid of it, but to ameliorate it. Maybe there was an additional charge that they could put no time on, that kind of thing, if they thought the circumstances made it necessary. But you're absolutely right. The reason mandatory minimums came into existence were judges who were not following the basic tenets of what the legislative body in the various states or in the U.S. had set out.
And your bill doesn't address mandatory minimums. Your bill just creates a framework with respect to the components of fentanyl.
That is correct.
And then that would then relate to mandatory minimums under existing law, correct?
That is correct.
So we're not addressing that, right?
That is correct.
The last point that I would just make, there's some commentary on some colleagues on the other side about the, supposedly controversial memorandum issued by the Office of Management and Budget, which was guidance that, has been rescinded. But in light of what was put forward, let's just be very clear. It was a temporary pause. And it was, to the extent that it was permitted by law, it was grant, federal financial assistance programs that are implicated by the president's executive orders regarding DEI, climate change, and a lot of the woke agenda, a lot of the things the president put forward. It was designed to ensure that a lot of those programs weren't proceeding. And those programs, for example, we're talking about including dollars that were flowing to through NGOs and through organizations that find those dollars that get to Mexico, that get to the cartels, that get to the flow of human beings and narcotics, fentanyl through our southern border, that there was dollars flowing from taxpayers through NGOs that was facilitating the very trafficking that we're trying to address in this bill. So I think OMB should be commended for trying to clarify that. The White House should be commended for trying to restrict the flow of American taxpayer dollars through NGOs to those who wish to do us harm, because that is factually occurring and factually accurate. And so I think the president is correct to be doing that, and correct to be aggressive in doing that, and similarly correct in being aggressive at going after U.S. aid funding, which was just blatantly filled with absurd spending. $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, inclusion in Serbia's workplace and business communities. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles for Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million for tourism in Egypt. Millions to EcoHealth Alliance, $20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq to promote inclusion, $45 million for DEI scholarships in Burma. I could go on and on and on. It is absurd use of taxpayer dollars. I applaud the president, the White House for going after them, and I appreciate you bringing this legislation for the Rules Committee. I'll support the rule, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you. And I would first yield to Mr. McGovern for a minute.
Yeah, I would just say to the gentleman who I don't know what you're talking about. First of all, with regard to that freeze, I don't know about the gentleman, but I get calls from hospitals and medical centers in my district that the Medicaid portal was frozen. I got a call from a veterans organization that serves homeless veterans.
No, you didn't,
that
because it
their
never was.
Payment portal was frozen. So I don't know what thought went into this so-called freeze. Thankfully, a judge put a stay on it and basically called it out for what it was, an overreach. It was unlawful. In terms of USAID, I'm happy to sit down with the gentleman and educate him about the importance of USAID in terms of its efforts to fight hunger, its efforts to promote human rights, its efforts to help combat disease, essentially to keep us safer in this country.
By making sure transgender comics get in Guatemala.
If you don't like USAID, the president doesn't like USAID, I have a suggestion for him, and that is come to Congress because we're the ones who actually help establish the program. Come to Congress and if you want to eliminate, vote to eliminate it. Vote to cut the funding. But USAID is an agency that saves lives, fights hunger, and strengthens democracy. It's also an investment in the American people. Let's talk about what USA.
It's either all or nothing, right? You can't
why it
cut the
makes America
wasteful
safer
spending
and
and keep
stronger.
the good spending.
USAID fights
You just
child
get,
mortality.
it's all or nothing.
Since 2008,
You cut it or you
it's saved
don't.
4.6 million children and 200,000 mothers. You didn't hear the president's press secretary say anything about that because she was just determined to try to diminish the program. And I should say, when kids thrive, families and communities grow stronger. Healthier societies mean more global stability, which enhances our own security. U.S.
Does it enhance our security when we fund the opiate fucking production in Afghanistan? Does that enhance our security, McGovern? Again, why the fuck is it always either cut everything or don't cut anything at all? Like, you can't get rid of the wasteful bullshit? Oh, I'm sorry. Is that your pocketbook, your dark money funneling? Is that what that really is? Is that how you're getting your kickbacks? Sorry, fucking millions of dollars for fucking transgender comic book. The fuck is wrong with you? Why the fuck should my money be going for that? Stop doing retarded shit just so you can line your fucking pocket.
USAID helps fight diseases like malaria and AIDS. Since 2007, it has saved 6 million lives from malaria and helped 9.5 million people get HIV/AIDS treatment. I mean, fighting disease abroad protects Americans at home from pandemics. USAID fights hunger. Feed the Future increases farmer self-sufficiency. Food for Peace reduces hunger dramatically. Each package of USAID food is labeled "From the American People." Both programs are a display of our values and build global goodwill around the world. It helps educate kids. Since 2011, it has helped 52 million kids go to school. Why does that matter? Because education fights extremism, and every kid in school is less at risk of recruitment by terrorist organizations, by gangs and cartels. I could go on and on and on, but I mean, this kind of selective picking some minor things that my friends can exploit in a way to try to undermine USAID, I think is really offensive. This is a
What's offensive is you sitting there thinking that my tax dollars in the tunes of hundreds of millions of fucking dollars should be used as a dark money funneling fucking campaign to line your pockets and the pockets of every other Democrat and Republican in the fucking Congress there. You're taking from my money that's supposed to go here to this country to make this country better, to make this country thrive, sending it overseas so you can funnel it back to yourself because, hey, if it goes overseas, we don't track that shit, apparently. I mean, wasn't even Zelensky saying, hey, y'all motherfuckers still owe me money?
program does a lot of incredible good stuff for people at risk around the world, people who are victims, whose rights are constantly trampled on by dictators in their countries. We should be proud of this program. We should be proud of the people who work there. And what the president did, what Elon Musk did, what his spokesperson did, I think is offensive. And by the way, I'm going to send the president a copy of the Constitution. Again, if he wants to change USAID, wants to eliminate it, he's got to come here. He's got to come here and
What
do
up,
it.
Bowler?
That's the way this system works. You know, he's not a king. He's not a dictator, at least yet. He's got to follow the Constitution. I thank the gentlelady.
Okay, thank you. Certainly associate myself with the remarks and the concern that the president is doing by executive order what he is unable to do through our constitutional channels, which is if he does not like a program, he does not like congressionally authorized spending, he can try to work with Congress, but simply issuing these edicts, many of which are illegal and unconstitutional, is not the way to go. But to HR 27, just like every district across this country, my constituents have been gravely touched by this opioid crisis.
Wasn't it illegal and unconstitutional for Biden to give out the student loan forgiveness shit? Wasn't that illegal and unconstitutional? And he just said, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. Even after the Supreme Court said, no, you can't fucking do this, the son of a bitch said, yeah, watch me, and just put pen to paper. So you want to talk about illegal and unconstitutional. it's illegal and unconstitutional for you to steal hundreds of millions of dollars from the American taxpayer just to make yourself fucking rich. Come on, there ain't no way in hell you're gonna sit there and tell me a bartender like AOC barely struggling to fucking survive within 2-3 fucking years sitting in the House of fucking Congress is worth a couple $1,000,000 in a couple of years off what, $120,000 salary, something like that, 120, 150, something like that, anywhere between that. Somehow she's worth millions of dollars in just a couple of fucking years at $100,000 salary. You expect me to believe that, Scanlon?
Crisis. I appreciate the gentleman's acknowledgement that it's a bipartisan problem, but I do think the gentlelady's observation is well taken, that it deserves a bipartisan solution.
To be
A
fair,
crisis of this
it doesn't
scale
matter.
Should be something that
She went
Republicans and
from
Democrats
literally owning nothing to
together
having
on,
millions
but
of fucking
that's not
dollars
what
in
this
just a
bill
few fucking
does.
years when she went to
It's the same
Congress. Her family
partisan
owned
bill
everything.
that
She
we saw
didn't.
fail to become law
But yet
almost 2
somehow
years
she's a
ago. It has
millionaire just
not
riding the backs of the American fucking people.
appreciably changed. What Republicans seem to want and what this bill is a piece of paper they can wave around to pretend they're doing something about fentanyl.
How the
much
hell does
like
Nancy
the
Pelosi have all her
performative
money
tariff war we
off
got
the
to enjoy
170,000 she's supposed to make or something like that?
Tariff war end after the president got assurances that our closest allies are going to do what they already were doing with the Biden administration. At any rate, fentanyl and opioids are a national public health crisis, and we can't solve anything just by using strong language and increasing jail sentences. As Representative DeGette noted, we need to address both the public safety and the public health aspects of this. And there are bipartisan bills that would do that, only the speaker won't bring them up. So we're stuck with this bill. This bill doesn't do anything about ports of entry or distribution networks. It doesn't do anything to support the DEA or local law enforcement. It doesn't improve our ability to interdict drugs coming into the U.S.
Interdict, but ma'am, that's what HR 2 is for. You know, the one that's still sitting on the Senate fucking floor? Yeah, HR 2. That's what you're talking about.
And it doesn't do anything to support the evidence-based treatments that have proven successful in reducing opioid deaths in the past 2 years. Because as the president of Mexico correctly pointed out yesterday, until the U.S. addresses the demand for fentanyl here, all the border theatrics in the world are
Better
not
than
going
Warren
to solve
Buffett.
that crisis. All this bill is going to do is increase jail time for people struggling with addiction because traffickers already face stiff penalties. And of course, while there's posturing about this bill, the president has tried to freeze federal funds that support local police, substance abuse prevention, state opioid programs, interagency programs that would combat drug trafficking. And while that freeze might have been temporarily stayed, there are still executive orders which have halted research and work at the CDC and NIH that would actually treat and prevent opioid abuse. So it's hard to believe that this bill is a serious attempt to find solutions. It seems to be, yet again, a bill about messaging, a messaging bill that has not been improved or added to since we saw it
What did he
last.
find?
And that's just exploiting a crisis that's killing Americans. So we look forward to a time when we can have a serious conversation about what to do about fentanyl. Democrats have offered a number of amendments that would greatly improve this bill. But until our colleagues are willing to work on solutions, we're just frustrated by sound bites, and we shouldn't be playing political games with people's lives. So I yield back.
Mr. Scott of Georgia is now recognized for his questions.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the chairman and ranking member, and appreciate your thoughtful testimony from both of you with respect to the bill that's in front of us. Mr. Griffith, this is an issue you've worked on for some time.
Yes.
Fair to say. And I can tell you're passionate about opioid abuse prevention. Fair to say?
Yes, it is.
In my understanding, doing some research, you had worked on a provision about 7 or 8 years ago that actually we've adopted in Colorado around a program that enables pharmacists, doctors, professionals, licensed professionals to be able to take back unexpired, or rather unexpired and similar products, pharmaceuticals, opioids, to try to alleviate and ameliorate the crisis. Is that a fair?
That is fair.
And my understanding is that that program actually got adopted into federal law back in 2016 in a bill that Ms. DeGette and you both voted for, the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. Is that?
I don't recall the bill, but surprisingly, Ms. DeGette and I often agree on issues like this.
Well, you agreed on this one because
Yeah.
it was a common sense program to try to address what is clearly a challenge in our country. You championed it. You got it into this law that was ultimately signed into law by then President Obama. It's an important program that you helped author. I assume you're aware that that program was frozen last week by President Trump.
Yeah,
I understand there was a memo that was sent out by the OMB.
that's
that-
the
that
problem.
Temporarily froze a lot of programs, and that was
Including
lifted.
this one.
I was not aware that this one was included, and obviously.
I'm not sure what wasn't included. If you have a better sense of what wasn't included than me, I'm all ears, because hearing from my constituents, virtually every constituent that contacted our office last week in a panic over this unlawful directive that OMB had issued that thankfully a federal judge has now partially stayed. And I guess this isn't a gotcha. I mean, part of the reason why I asked this, Representative Griffith, is you worked on these issues for a long time.
Yes.
And I'm
Been
trying to
sitting too long.
understand the logic behind authoring legislation and pursuing it when you have no guarantees that this administration will ultimately spend the dollars that are allocated by this Congress for the stated purposes that Congress intends.
I don't think there's any question that the administration will, in due time, and of course, this has already been resolved, but in due time, will follow the law as it is written.
What is due time? How long do we have to wait for them to follow
Well,
the law?
I think long enough so that they can figure out if all the money that was being sent out. I mean, a lot of us have concerns that in the last 3 or 4 months prior to President Trump being sworn in, a lot of money by a lot of different agencies was shoveled out the door, and was shoveled out the door perhaps inappropriately or improperly. And an incoming president wants to take a look at that. I don't have a problem with
USAID
that.
can do
Okay,
some
so
good.
how
Now,
long?
it was inartful in the way that it was.
Jesus Christ, USAID could do some good, but there's way too much bleeding. I mean, just hemorrhaging of fucking money coming from that area, and that's all we're sitting here saying is stop this dumb shit. And they're like, no, you either cut it all or you cut nothing, and it's fucking pathetic.
Perhaps
How
done.
long?
Oh, I would say that since they pulled it back, they're taking other ways to look at it. But I would say that we would have to take a look at a number of items, that the administration is going to take a look at a number of
So
items.
you don't have
I
a time in mind.
I don't, and I don't think
Okay.
that they would have, I don't think they will do a blanket
And who makes that
freeze.
rule? You're
I-
making that rule?
No.
Who's
no.
deciding that now the
I think-
Constitution is held in abeyance and the President of the United States, either president, of any political party, can come in and basically decree, I'm pausing all federal funding
I think
until
that's
I
part-
decide I'm comfortable.
I think that's part of the executive branch's
It was for 14 days, not until he decides he's comfortable. For 14 days to take a look at where everything is going.
duty to execute the laws that we've passed. And what they have to do is determine if the monies that have come into the United States are being spent in a manner in accordance with the law. And I think that to execute the laws properly and to do their job as an executive branch, they have to take stock of every dollar that's being spent by the United States to make sure that it is properly authorized. And once they determine that it is properly authorized, then they'll release
Well,
any concerns or any holds.
I certainly hope that you serve in Congress for a long time, Mr. Griffith, so that you are here when a Democratic president follows your admonition and decides that they're going to unilaterally shut down and freeze
Well,
federal funding
I
for
have
any
s-
hold on, Mr. I let you finish, so I'm going to finish my remarks. To let them freeze federal funding for any program that they so choose for as long as they choose, because essentially your rule, this rule that apparently Republicans have adopted in the last 2 weeks, has no logical limitation. I've yet to hear a cogent explanation for how you can justify the President of the United States, again, of either political party, deciding unilaterally that they will freeze, that they will impound funds. And I understand that there are Republicans who disagree with the constitutionality of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 and the rest. I think those arguments are not.
So if Congress voted this into everything that we ever had, that we have now, that we will ever have to another fucking country just on a whim, and you get Congress, you get House and Senate to approve that, the president should have no fucking say on stopping that. Is that what you're trying to sit there and say, Nagoose? Because I'm sorry, where do the checks and balances come into the play here? Because you're sitting there saying you can do whatever the fuck you want with our money and our president has absolutely no say in it. But then again, you're saying that you have full fucking control of what the president can and cannot do. What the fuck? Where's the checks and balances at, asshole? What you've literally lost the plot of your entire fucking. You didn't want a king? Don't put him any fucking higher.
Nonsensical, but I understand that some have those arguments. But I don't really understand how you can make these arguments you're making as you are here testifying in support of a bill to create new laws and new programs that I suppose you're just on a hope and a prayer, believing that this president and the people who he surrounded himself with will decide that maybe they'll enforce this, maybe they won't.
Is
Good
that
luck.
a question?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that it's like so many things. That's why we have three branches, and we have the judicial branch. And just like the court decided with pornography, if a executive branch leader, a president, decided to negate the spending in aberration or against the will of Congress, the courts would then make that determination. But to give them a chance to figure out whether or not the money's been spent properly, I think is appropriate. And I think a court would find, just like they did with pornography, you gotta judge each case on its own merits. And that's why I can't give you a time. I can't tell. In some cases, it might be a week. In some cases, it might be 6 months. But I think that's why we have a judicial branch to sort out that difference between Congress and the executive branch. But I do understand the executive branch having the desire to, if it believes, and I think that they do in this case, believe that monies were sent out the door improperly or without lawful authority, and they have time to check into that. I think the courts would give them some time. How much time would depend on each individual case and the complexities therein.
Well, you and I will disagree strenuously on that point. The Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 for a reason. And the notion that we're now going to allow the President of the United States to unilaterally impound funds, unilaterally dismantle agencies, and let the courts figure it out, I think is a deeply dangerous approach. And I think it undermines the constitutional fabric that our framers, that James Madison and others write about in the Federalist Papers.
It's a deeply dangerous approach to stop your money from being laundered in different programs and different countries to be funneled back to people just like him. It's dangerous for our country to stop the hemorrhaging of your money.
I, for the life of me, cannot understand, or I best maybe perhaps understand is the wrong word. I'm disappointed that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle won't stand up for the constitutional prerogatives of this Article I branch of government. Happy to yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nagusan. I thought that was really profound. I just want to echo what you're saying is here we have this bill that we're purporting to say will stop the fentanyl crisis, but it's a tiny little thing that just amends the Controlled Substances Act. And maybe some of it could be used for not, but in the meantime, last week, the Trump administration froze all of these substance abuse acts. It froze the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics Act. We just heard that the rural health grantees have told us their money is still frozen. And in Congress, we say, my dear friend, but it's really true in this situation. But my colleague and friend says in due time, the administration will figure it out. So in the meantime, Congress is here. This is one of my pet peeves with being in Congress is people do this tiny little thing over here and they say they solved a problem. But at the same time, there's this massive problem that the Trump administration has caused with, just relating today, with programs designed to prevent and stop fentanyl abuse.
Ma'am, I'm fucking sorry. The Trump administration, they did what? If the border wasn't wide the fuck open under Biden, it wouldn't have been as bad now, would it have? You whiny little fucking cunt. You're going to sit there and try to scream Orange Man bad to cover up your complicitness in the border fucking crisis that we've had. I'm sick of it. There's a reason why I keep talking about that one word I do. This is the reason.
And no resolution in line. So let's just call it what it is. It is a abuse of the congressional system to say that the administration is just going to do whatever they think, and it's going to impact people who are affected by the fentanyl crisis. Thank you for the
No, I
question.
couldn't agree with you
Didn't we
more.
just go through that for 4
Ms.
fucking
Degan,
years,
and
though?
I think you articulated well the situation before us. Mr. Griffith, I mean, humor me a bit. What agency is responsible, just so I'm clear, with respect to enforcing this bill, the provisions of this bill?
This would end up being DOJ.
DOJ and DEA, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, of course, DEA being obviously a sub-agency of DOJ. Can the president just get rid of DOJ? Can he get rid of DEA unilaterally? What if he decides that, he sees this bill and says, well, I don't know, I'm worried about what's happening in the DEA, so I've decided I'm going to eliminate the agency. Does he have the authority to do that?
I think if it's created by Congress, it would require a congressional act.
Okay. We're in agreement there. How about the Department of Education?
Likewise.
Likewise. All right. I look forward to visiting with you on that topic, in particular the latter topic, I suspect sooner than later. Thank you. I yield back.
Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Jack.
Well, I just want to start by saying, since President Trump's been invoked over and over.
The sad thing is, the motherfucker actually thought he did something by running in circles for the guy to say, yeah, Congress would have to go ahead and close the Department of Education. Duh, you dumb son of a bitch. All of that. Just for him to get to say that. And the goose is just like, yeah, I got him. Why? Why are we feeding this stupidity in Congress? Why are we putting this retardation here? Honest question, America.
I'll
be right back.
I think and for the record, we should note that his negotiating posture over the weekend led to a few new developments from Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau, for the first time ever, is appointing a fentanyl czar. He's going to list cartels as terrorist organizations. And he's going to launch a joint strike force between the U.S. and Canada to combat fentanyl. So I'd like that noted for the record. But I just have one question to Mr. Griffith. You introduced this legislation last Congress. 74 Democrats supported it. Are there any substantive changes from the administration last Congress, or rather from the bill last Congress to the bill today?
There are not.
Well, then I'll just conclude and yield back by noting that 74 Democrats crossed the party, across the aisle to join Republicans in passing this legislation out of the House last Congress. I hope more join this Congress, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jack. We now recognize Mrs. Fishbach from Minnesota.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the discussion. I always appreciate the fact that the opposition is able to bring a whole lot of other issues in when we're talking about stopping fentanyl. And it takes a lot of creativity to make sure that they are able to talk about, use their talking points to point out some of those things. But I'll just say, on this bill, I'm a co-sponsor. We voted on it last year. I think that is helpful. We obviously need to get fentanyl under control and stop it. It is killing our citizens. And so I appreciate you bringing the bill forward. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman.
I'll be brief. You know, I've sat here and listened to really some amazing comments. Abuse of the system. We don't have bipartisanship. I've heard safety of children. I've heard points of entry. Mr. Griffith, you know, when President Biden opened up the border, did you see the numbers that came out from that were publicized finally about the unoccupied, the children that crossed the border, didn't have parents with them, to the tune of 600,000?
I have seen those numbers.
How is that? I guess my Democrat friends thinks that's safety coming across the border and what they're facing now without parents. I have in my county been to drug bust where fentanyl was on the table, and finally they made the arrest to get those who produced it out of the state. But if it were left like it was, it killed the 5 million people in South Carolina. And don't you think it's pretty bold action what this president's doing to stop the fentanyl flow by shutting the border down that the Biden administration just would not do? They opened it up. It was unconstitutional. And it just seemed like those children coming across the border they didn't care about it.
Yes.
Lakeland Riley just didn't care about it. The hundreds of thousands of poisonings of our young people just didn't care about. And now to raise the fine points why they don't like your bill, that's kind of hypocritical, isn't it?
It's hard for me to say somebody's hypocritical without looking into their heart. So I don't know that I can go that far, but I
What
can
about
tell
what
you
they
it's
said?
illogical to have the two positions.
Well, you've heard just what I've heard.
I have, and was very concerned when the Biden administration stopped, already let contracts, left equipment there to rust in building the wall, just stopped that outright. I've been very concerned about the Office of Refugee
And then sold it
Resettlement.
off for pennies at the
They
pennies on the
actually are
dollar.
under the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's the only part of the immigration issue that is. And the fact that the background checks that they do are simply a search on the computer to determine if the person they're placing a child with has a criminal background. They're just checking an internet search engine, kind of like People Finder or something like that. And then not doing home studies, not making sure that these people are actually legitimate and proper caretakers of children. If we did that with a child in the United States, there would be criminal action brought. I will tell you that you brought up the children, and it's a passion issue for me because no matter how they got here, we need to take care of these kids once they're put into our custody. And we basically are shipping them all over the country, or were shipping them all over the country without doing a proper background check and without doing a check to see if they were actual residences there and to see if those were appropriate homes. They started after some push from the Energy and Commerce Committee. The last administration did start to do some virtual inspections of quarters where kids were supposed to be living, but the level of checking on the children who came here without being accompanied by a parent, and the amount of things that we didn't do that led to some of these kids being used in labor situations where they weren't properly supposed to be in the first place has been documented by the New York Times. So yeah, I find it illogical. That's not what this bill's about either. But since we started talking about all these things and all the world problems, we're trying to solve one little problem with this bill. And I grant you, it's not going to solve everything, but it makes it easier for law enforcement to go in, make that arrest, and then have those people face justice without having to argue about whether it was a right-hand molecule, left-hand molecule, or that it was slightly different than what is currently in the law. And with 4,800 potential fentanyl-related substances or analogs, and with only about 30 to 40 of them having been studied, this bill is needed, not just on a temporary basis, but on a permanent basis. But with that many potential analogs out there that might have some benefit down the road, that's why, From the very beginning, I insisted we have a research component that made it clear and easy to do research to see if there's something valuable out there that can help people who are in pain or are having trouble.
Well, it was multiplied by I don't know what number in 2020 when the border was opened up. And 15 to 20 million people are in here, and the deaths and fentanyl. What your bill addresses is a drug that is largely has been increased because of the Biden administration letting anybody and everybody across the border. And so I appreciate you putting this up and fully support it. I yield back.
This concludes the questions of our witnesses. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing here at the Rules Committee today. The witnesses are excused. We'll now move on to amendment testimony, and we'd like to welcome Mr. Hernandez, Puerto Rico.
Sir, turn your mic on.
Thank you. I'm not a fan of statistics, but sometimes we need them to make a point. Over the past 2 years, more than 1,000 American citizens in Puerto Rico, Puerto Riqueños, have died from fentanyl overdoses. Just last year in San Juan, over 20 people overdosed in a single incident linked to fentanyl, resulting in 8 deaths. Some of these tragedies happened because of fentanyl combined with xylazine, a powerful sedative approved by the FDA for animals. You might be wondering why this is an issue of national.
If y'all have watched us for a while, Haley kind of clued us off onto that. She wrote an article about xylazine and the effects on it, and we couldn't even show you the images. Basically, it was literally rotting the flesh off people. It's a wicked drug.
Concern. The answer is quite simple. Puerto Rico is America's Caribbean
It's an
border.
animal
and it
tranquilizer.
serves as a transit point for drugs smuggled to the U.S. mainland. Stopping the flow of fentanyl and xylazine to Puerto Rico is necessary to stop the flow of these drugs to the U.S. mainland. That is why I have introduced 2 bipartisan amendments supported by Representative James Moylan of Guam and
Somewhere around there.
Stacey Plaskett of the U.S. Virgin Islands to address the increasing presence of fentanyl and xylazine in Puerto Rico and across the United States. Amendment 29 would require the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Caribbean Border Counter-Narcotics Strategy to develop a comprehensive policy strategy to combat drug trafficking in the region. Amendment 30 would direct the Attorney General to submit a report to Congress assessing the use and trafficking patterns of fentanyl mixed with xylazine in the Caribbean. I respectfully urge the distinguished chair, ranking members, and members of this committee to advance my amendments and ensure they are made in order.
Take it
Thank
easy,
you. I
Muffin.
yield back.
The gentleman for coming here to testify. Are there any questions? I have no questions at this time. Yield to Mr. McGovern.
I want to thank the gentleman for coming and hope we'll make your amendments in order.
Thank you. And now we recognize, we would start with Mr. Scott.
I don't have any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Griffith? Mr. Jack?
No questions. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Fishbach? Mr. Norman? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
excused.
They're just wanting to get the fuck up out of there.
Without objection, I will insert into the record the statement of administration policy for HR 27. Okay. Thank you for appearing, for all of our witnesses for appearing for us today. Seeing no other members wishing to testify on amendments, on HR 27, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting.
And of course, they come back in to vote. We'll take it to this instead of actually hearing it because I got some things to do. Those were the amendments to everything that HR 27 that we were just listening to them bullshit about. There was a vote to motion by Mr. Govern to amend the rule to make order amendment 32 offered by Representative Magaziner he is God, what's his Pee Wee Herman of Rhode Island, which ensures that the security of the Secretary of Homeland Security shall cooperate with state and local law enforcement agencies to interdict and seize firearms being trafficked to cartels that undermine public safety and national security and further fuels fentanyl trafficking in the United States. That motion was defeated 1-9. The only one that actually voted for the Democrat side was Mr. McGovern. Motion by Mr. McGovern to amend the rules to make amendments 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 18, and 35 to H.R. 27, which would collectively prevent the underlying bill from taking effect until certification that no covered executive action freezes, reduces, impairs, delays, or otherwise interferes with timely funding of state opioid response grants, substance use prevention blocks, the Drug-Free Communities Program, and other critical programs. That was also defeated 1-9. The motion to pass the bill through the House or through House Rules Committee, motion by Mr. McGriffith, adopted 9-1. As it stands right now, the way the bill is written, it is now going to go further into the process for, I think Judiciary would have to have it off at this point. Maybe Homeland Security as well, maybe getting a piece of that, but I don't know. We'll have to continue to track this one the fuck down because this one's a little tricky. This one is a little tricky. There's a lot of very weird things that do need to be changed about it because Schedule 1, making something Schedule 1 just pretty much takes it off the market. Even if it is in the medical field and done appropriately and safely, it would still take it off the market. Analog drugs like that, we still have laws against that. So that one could hurt. We'll take a look at that though. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get off here real quick. I got to set up the show for tonight. We're going to have a little member show with y'all tonight. We're just going to bring on some people who want to join us. Come on in. We got in the Discord. I'll post a link in the Discord for the StreamYard link that we're going to be doing here. We'll be talking about the Pam Bondi nomination. We'll be talking about a lot of what she's been doing because that woman has been working since she put her hand on that Bible. She has been working, and we'll be talking a lot about that. Let's see. We also a question I proposed to you yesterday. What the fuck does saying there are only two sexes have to do with the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases like AIDS? We'll show you why I asked that question. And then we also got a little bit more. Roughly, we're just going to end it just having fun and ragging on our representatives, freaking the fuck out about all the changes we're about to see and have seen already. It's going to be fun, ladies and gentlemen. We got some news updates for you about Aurora, Colorado as well. Y'all are going to want to check it out. Let's have some fun tonight. Until then, I'll leave you with Rob for just a few hours. Take it easy, everybody. Y'all have a good night.